You keep thinking election night is over. I know. But we keep coming back like something you can't quite shake. You're taking the pills, you're doing what your doctor says, but we just keep coming back relentlessly, again and again. Thanks for being back with us. I'm Rachel Maddow, coming to you live from our Runoff election night studio here at MSNBC headquarters. I'm joined once again by my beloved colleagues Joy Reid, Nicole Wallace, Chris Hayes is here, Ari Melber, and many more of our colleagues will be joining us throughout the night. That said, we know why you're actually here, and it has nothing to do with any of us. You're here because the great Steve Kornacki is at the big board, ready to deliver us all the election results as they come in, with an uncanny, even unearthly ability to explain the significance of those results as they arrive. It's almost spooky. While we steam toward poll closing time in Georgia, we're also cognizant of the fact that there is another huge news story that has just broken tonight. The leader of the Republican Party, the immediate former president who has just announced he's running for president again, his business today was just convicted on all counts in the highest level trial court in the state of New York. There were 17 criminal charges brought against Donald Trump's family business. The jury tonight returned a verdict of guilty on all 17 of the 17 counts. Now, we have been absorbing that news since it broke just before 4 o'clock Eastern today. We've been covering it intensively for the last couple of hours here on MSNBC, including our friend Ari doing a live and news-breaking interview with Alvin Bragg, the New York District Attorney whose prosecutors brought this case. I assure you we will be coming back to that story soon and as it further develops over the course of the evening. But the reason we're all here right now, encroaching on Ari's hour, the reason we're here at this exact time is because the polls are about to close in the great state of Georgia, where the winner of a United States Senate seat will be determined by the voters of Georgia tonight. Incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock won this seat 2 years ago in a special election sparked by the retirement of Republican Senator Johnny Isakson. Having now served out the remainder of Johnny Isakson's term, tonight Senator Raphael Warnock is running for a full 6-year term in the Senate. He is therefore defending his seat against his challenger, a Trump-backed Republican challenger named Herschel Walker. The winner of this race will determine whether Democrats control an evenly divided 50-50 Senate next year, or whether they have a firmer, more comfortable 51-49 majority. And that sounds like a small difference, I know. But it does have big implications for what Congress and therefore what the whole U.S. government can actually substantively get done. Joe Manchin. Polls close, polls close in Georgia at 7 o'clock Eastern. So that means Georgia voters are now in their final minutes of casting ballots or getting in line to do so. But now, by all accounts, voting has gone relatively smoothly today. Few reports today of long lines or long waits. That may be at least in part because of the very large number of Georgians who chose to vote early in this election. Many of those 2 million plus voters, the people who voted early, they did face very long lines. That's thanks largely to Georgia Republicans passing a law after the 2020 election, which dramatically cut the amount of early voting allowed before the runoff. It's pretty easy math. You do fewer days, fewer hours for voting. That means longer lines at voting sites. And that was true throughout the early voting period. But today's election day seems to have been great turnout on election day as well today. And if there's one thing the people of Georgia have proven in the last few years, it's that when it comes time to vote, they are very determined to get it done no matter what. I therefore probably don't have to remind you of this, but I will anyway. If you are within the sound of my voice in the state of Georgia right now, remember that as long as you are in line to vote before the polls close at 7, you can still vote, no matter how long the line is, no matter how long it takes you to actually get to that voting machine. If you are there in line by 7 o'clock, you get in line, you stay in line, you cast your vote. Don't let anyone dissuade you. This is your right. Joining us now from Georgia, from a Get Out the Vote event across the street from a big polling place in Atlanta, is MSNBC national correspondent Trymaine Lee. Trymaine, tell us where you are and what you're seeing. It looks like a party.
So, Rachel, I'm probably at the livest polling place in the state of Georgia right now in southwest Atlanta. This is a group called When We Vote, We Win. They've been out here. Listen, they call this a party at the polls. They have free food. The music has been banging. They're making sure that anyone who came up had information about voting, and they're within the rules. So because of SB 202, you can't be within 100 feet, you can't give anybody food or water. So they said, let's take it across the street and make sure that people that come out to vote are fed. Now, the line today hasn't been extremely long. People have been trickling in and out. But organizers say that they wanted to make sure they maintain the momentum and energy because it has indeed, Rachel, been a long election season, right? This marathon to the general election and then this sprint to the runoff with that kind of truncated time frame being cut from 9 weeks to 4 weeks. But the intensity around not just these two candidates and not just around the policy issues, but really about what voting means for this community and what it means for Georgia and what it means for all those people who are part of this machine to make sure black folks and poor people and working class folks have access to the polls. I've been talking to folks all day about that exact point, what it means, and this is what they had to say.
The excitement of it, the push. I have 2 young boys that I'm raising at home. I wanted them to be able to see what it's like to have a black man in office, who's God-fearing, and that, they can do it too.
This is our job, this is our duty. There's places all over this world where people aren't allowed to vote. Hell, we weren't allowed to vote, And now that we're able to, people want to talk about fatigue. I'm sorry, no, I'm not fatigued.
I'm sorry, I'm not fatigued. But I want to turn around again one more time to look at this crowd. These nights are special for us here at MSNBC. We cover this stuff. But for America, this is democracy in action. And there was so much concern about voter suppression, about limiting access to the polls, about when you can drop off ballots and mail them in, all the efforts to try to restrict the vote. So this community, this state, people in Atlanta, especially Metro Atlanta, and in those rural parts of the state, organized voters, getting the word out. The Black Voters Matter buses here. You have When We Vote, We Win. These folks are about it. They're serious, and they didn't come to play in the game, Rachel.
Tremaine, it's an amazing sight and an amazing part of the story. I have to ask you, obviously we can see over your shoulder, we can see the enthusiasm of those activists. As you say, a party at the polls is very much evident there. When you're seeing people come up to that polling place, regular voters coming up there because that's their place to vote, what's the interaction like between voters and these folks who are across the street, again, outside the perimeter where they need to be legally? But what's the interaction, what's the dynamic like between regular voters who are showing up and these people who are there to be encouraging, to convey their enthusiasm?
Well, at first, it's a little curiosity. When you stand in the parking lot, and again, it's not far, it's just across the street, folks hear the music, right? Because you kind of hear it. They vote and they come out and they see a line of food trucks. And they come up and they say, hey, it's free. They grab a ticket and then they start interacting. You have the NAACP out here. You have When We Vote, We Win. You have Black Voters Matter. And it's a real community feel. People who know each other, those who don't. You see some young folks, some older people. There is a real sense of community. I've referenced it a number of times, but all around the streets here in Southwest Atlanta, you see these placards with John Lewis, Barack Obama, and Martin Luther King saying, vote early. And others have that same picture and it says vote. And so there's a deep connection to something much bigger in this community. So it's not just about, your civic duty. And it sounds cliche at this point that people fought and died, but that's the feeling, that people fought and died. So people are coming together, strangers coming together all around this idea of making your voice heard through the ballot.
MSNBC national correspondent Tremaine Lee. Tremaine, that just tremendous reporting. It's great to have you there. We'll be back with you over the course of the night. Thank you, my friend. All right, let's get right to Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, looks like we're about 6 minutes away from poll closing time. Can you just tell us what you're expecting in terms of how you think the night is going to unfold, how long a night it might be in terms of getting these results?
Yeah, a couple of benchmarks we saw in the November general election in Georgia, and I'll call those results up just to remind everybody sort of what the starting point was. This is how the November general election finished. Warnock ran about a point better than Herschel Walker. He was a little less, Warnock was, than 25,000 votes. If he'd gotten about 25,000 extra votes, we wouldn't be here tonight covering this. He would have cleared 50%, would have won the election outright. So he came out of the general election ahead of Walker, not enough to get away from a runoff situation, though. Now, what we saw in the November general election, though, was a little different than what we'd seen in 2020 in Georgia. If you remember, in 2020, Georgia's one of those states that kept us waiting for days and for days and for days to get an outcome. It was actually a little bit after midnight in November when we were able to call, when NBC News was able to call that this race would go to a runoff, that nobody would break 50%. So in that sense, we were able to declare a verdict shortly after midnight. Again, that was in a very close race here, inside of 1 point. The other thing that was different in November than I think we expect tonight is we got a lot more vote early in the night. And when I say early, I mean it was 7:01 p.m. On election night in November when we heard from a big county right away, Richmond County. This is where Augusta is. This is a big Democratic county. Basically, as soon as the polls closed, they put out all of the early vote. They're allowed to tabulate today on Election Day in these counties. They're allowed to tabulate the in-person early vote that had been taking place in the days and weeks leading up to today. They can tabulate that. They can tabulate the mail ballots that they've received in the last couple weeks, and they can, theoretically, if they do that, they can report it out as soon as polls close. So we saw that in Richmond County, where Augusta is, and then it was 7:06 p.m. on election night, 6 minutes after its polls closed, that the biggest county in the state, Fulton County, reported out more than 250,000 votes. Basically, all of the early vote in Fulton County was reported out within 6 minutes. So what did that mean, and what is that likely to mean for tonight? Well, there's been a push in Georgia to get some of these bigger counties to report out all of that vote that they can tabulate ahead of time, to get them to report that out fairly early. And a lot of them did that in November. And what that resulted in is sort of the running tally. The scoreboard here on the side, you see, giving Warnock a very big early lead. In the 7 to 8, 7 to 9 o'clock window or so on election night, Warnock had double-digit leads over Walker consistently in the statewide tally. What happens after that, though, is you start from the rest of the state. There's a lot of small, in terms of population, big in terms of geographic area, but small red counties all over the state. They start reporting out their same-day vote, the votes that were cast in person today. That's where Republicans are the strongest. And so what you can expect, when they start to come in, 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30, whenever exactly that is, that's where Walker on election night made big gains. And what had been a Warnock lead of double digits, suddenly by late at night, Walker actually took the lead in the tally over Warnock. About 11:30 on election night, Walker was leading. And then the final things to report: remaining vote, especially from the Atlanta metro area. Some of these just gigantic Democratic-heavy counties in the Atlanta area reporting out the remainder of their election day vote in some cases reporting out the remainder of their mail-in ballots. And that's what ultimately put Raphael Warnock ahead statewide back on election night. In fact, it was, I think, about 3:45 a.m. The final votes came in from election that were counted on election night. They were in Cobb County, and it was about 25,000 mail-in ballots. Warnock won them overwhelmingly, and it accounted for a big chunk of that 37,000 vote lead he had over Walker. So the basic pattern we saw in November: big start for the Democrats, then a big comeback for the Republicans, and then a big finish for the Democrats. That was the vote reporting pattern we saw back in November.
Steve, do you have any intel today on which counties might have done a very thorough job of tabulating the early votes that they came in? So early votes that were mailed in or that were dropped off, as you said, they could start tabulating them today at 7 a.m. Do you have any intel from various counties today as to who's finished their vote?
I don't know in terms of who's finished it. The fact that we saw that from Fulton County at 7:06 p.m. back in November suggests if they could do it then with so much more on the ballot, I can't see why they couldn't do that again. Augusta was very close. Another one to keep an eye on. Houston County, that's where Warner Robins is. They, I think, reported out at about 7:10 p.m. last time. A couple of these other counties in the immediate Atlanta metro area were in the first half hour. And again, what you're seeing, even in some of the Republican-friendly counties that report this pre-election vote out right away, remember, it's always that's the most Democratic-friendly share of the vote you're going to get in that county. So if you're talking about mail-in ballots, if you're talking about the early in-person vote, that's the most Democratic friendly. So when they report those big batches out first, in a blue county, it's going to be a huge advantage for Warnock. But even in a red county, those are going to be the best numbers Warnock gets in that county. And what's going to make or break Herschel Walker is the election day vote. And especially in some of these, you see, look at the outer periphery of the Atlanta metro area, there are some big, in terms of population, counties up here that are red on this map. They produce the largest pluralities for Republican candidates of any counties in the state. Is Walker getting big election day turnout there? And is he getting numbers scores like Brian Kemp was able to get in the governor's race in November. That's what will make or break him tonight.
We're about 15 seconds away from poll closing time. Steve, as soon as we start to get in any results as the polls close, we will be right back with you. Again, lots of early vote, more than 2 million early votes cast in Georgia in this runoff election. Republicans are very excited about how many people they saw turning out to vote on Election Day. They think that will be a heavily Republican-leaning Election Day vote, but we will not know until the numbers start coming in. It is now 7 o'clock Eastern Time, and NBC News can project, shockingly, that the U.S. Senate runoff race in Georgia is at this hour too early to call. Now, we have no idea how long this too early to call characterization will last. I can tell you nothing more than that because that's all we've got from the decision desk. But again, we've got a Democratic incumbent, Raphael Warnock, who's actually standing for this Senate seat for the 4th time in 2 years. He won it, or, well, he made it to the runoff in the first instance 2 years ago, and then he won in the runoff. He made it to the runoff, standing for re-election, and now he is contending in the runoff tonight. His Republican challenger, Trump-backed Republican, former football star Herschel Walker. All right, so Steve promises that we may get a bunch of early vote, especially from some of these fast voting counties. And again, the Democrats tend to be very confident in what they can get in terms of early vote. Republicans tend to be confident in terms of what they can get day of. Both sides are crowing about the numbers they got in their respective lanes where they think they've got a real chance. And I mean, you know, looking at the polls, are we even allowed to look at polls anymore? I mean, everything, basically, almost everything is within the margin of error, even if Senator Warnock has been up, I'd say, generally, you know, by less than a point if you take the average.
But I mean, if you think about the way the Democrats are looking at it, they're looking at the numbers. Sahil Kapoor was reporting on a lot of this yesterday. They're looking at the demographics of the early vote. It's more African-American than the vote was in November. There was a drop-off in African-American turnout for whatever reason in the November election. I heard a lot of anecdotal stories when I was in Atlanta yesterday about people knowing people who didn't come out because they assumed Warnock was going to win, and they didn't see the urgency, and they didn't come out. And they thought they knew the election. So we know that the electorate that's coming out, that came out early, is more African-American. It's about 3 points more African-American than it was in November. It's heavily female. It's like 53% female, which Democrats are very excited about. It's got a lot more young voters than they had in November. They're seeing a lot of turnout at college campuses. Now, that's mitigated by the fact that this new voting law makes it easier to challenge voters. So something like 60,000 voters were challenged under that new voting law. And for college students, it's especially difficult to vote now in Georgia. And the early long lines were also because of that voting law. So everything was stacked in. And then the other thing that voting law did is it made the early vote, it made it a shorter period. It's only 4 weeks. It used to be a longer period for a runoff election.
Yeah.
So Republicans have legislatively stacked the Georgia laws to make it as possible to make it as easy as possible for them to win and as hard as possible for Democrats to win. They've stacked it their way, but the demographics of those turning out look more favorable, much more favorable, honestly.
And they also, what the Republicans will concede when injected with truth serum and tied to a chair is that the Kemp voter was not a Walker voter.
Right.
And we learned that 4 weeks ago. And so I heard Senator Warnock talking about the Kemp, the voters that came out and voted for him and Kemp.
Oh, he's going after them.
Those voters have already voted, and they voted for Warnock.
Right.
I mean, Raffensperger and Kemp were far more popular vote getters and drivers of Republican voters than Walker. So if the only Republican you have to vote for tonight is Walker, that is not a good sign.
But it also may mean that complicates the ability to extrapolate from November's turnout, November demographics, to figuring out what's going to happen tonight. If it really is essentially a completely different ballot with a totally different set of appeal to different voters, it gives it more.
But that means they had to go out and find Walker voters who didn't exist in a general. I mean, I guess it's not possible.
The other part of this, right? There's this sort of amazing two forces at work. So the Georgia Republican Party gets together after they lose in 2020. They lose these 2 Senate races, and they lose the presidential, and they pass this new voting law to make it more difficult, the margin to vote. Donald Trump
predicated on fraud that they risked their identity as Republicans to say it didn't happen.
Then Donald Trump decides to basically continue to bash early voting, and Ronna McDaniel's out there today being like, please, for the love of God, stop doing this. Why would you tell people to not take advantage of a voting ballot?
By the way, absentee collapsed because of them.
I think I'm doing this, which is rude, because I think we have some vote, because I recognize those gesticulating motions from Steve. Steve, do you have something?
Rachel, this is just what we were teeing up exactly as it happened in November. Richmond County, which is where Augusta is, this is one of the big Democratic counties in Georgia. Right off the bat, they come out and they release, we believe this is their mail vote and their in-person early vote. That's what it was in November. They tabulated all on Election Day, spit it out as soon as the polls close. So if that's what we're looking at here, and I believe it is, you see Warnock getting 79% of it, Walker getting 21% of it. What would be left to come in Richmond County would be the Election Day vote, what people went out and cast ballots in person today. But just to give you a sense of comparison, and this is not necessarily apples to apples for some of the reasons you're just discussing in terms of the composition, the electorate, the share that the early vote's going to make up. But just as a point of reference, when we got this first report from Richmond County in November of the early vote and the mail-in vote, Warnock hit 75% with it. So he hit 79% with it tonight. Now, again, it could be that there ends up, and look, as I'm speaking, Fulton County, this is the biggest county in the state. This is where Atlanta is. And again, this is what they did in November as well. In November, what we were looking at and what I believe we're looking at here, essentially, this is the early vote. This is the early in-person vote, the votes that were cast pre-Election Day in person by voters in Fulton County. Warnock, this is a core Democratic county. This is the biggest in the state. Warnock getting 82% of them. Again, I can tell you that first report on election night, Warnock got 75%. So, again, this is higher for Warnock than he got in that initial report. This is not necessarily apples to apples, because we want to see, the dynamic here, the mix of same day versus election day could be a little bit different. But again, these are two core Democratic counties where you see right away Warnock jumping out, getting massive margins, and that's what it does to the statewide count. We got 7% of all the votes counted statewide, and you got a 3-to-1 lead for Warnock. Almost all of it powered by Fulton County, to a lesser extent by Richmond County. There are some other small counties here. We're starting to get some results in here. I can just show you, just to give you an example here. One thing that we're going to be following here is we're going to compare as the results come in. How do they look tonight versus how did they look back in the November general election? And you can see here again in Mitchell County, right away they spit out, we believe this would be the early vote. So again, this would be as friendly as the vote gets to Raphael Warnock. Once the same day vote comes in, you can expect Walker to advance. But Walker's starting point here with that early vote in this county is 46.5%. He basically got 57% in this county back in November. So what he needs is for the same day vote to bring him at least to this level, and really to get above this level is what he's going to be needing to do in any given county. Because remember, Walker finished a point behind Raphael Warnock in the count back in November. So that's the starting point there for Warnock. And again, we're just starting to get these numbers. These are just scattered numbers, from throughout the state right here. And we could just reset and show you statewide what this is adding up to. And get used to seeing big Warnock leads here, because I think for the first couple hours, and it's not going to sit at 75%, but I think you're going to see substantial Warnock advantages just for this dynamic we're talking about. We're getting early vote reported out, especially from a couple of population centers. Again, if November is a prelude to tonight, you're going to see a lot of these other counties right around Atlanta in the next 20 or 30 minutes. They're going to join in. They're also going to report early vote, mail-in vote. That's all going to benefit Warnock. And then what's going to start happening is the same-day vote is going to start coming in from all of the other counties in the state. There's 159 counties in Georgia. Warnock actually won fewer than 30 of them on election night back in November. He got more votes statewide than Walker did, but the vast majority of counties in the state, a lot of them are very small, are Republican counties. So as that same-day vote comes in from the Republican counties, that gap will close a little bit there. But what we're really building towards here, and I think what we're really going to be looking at, a couple of things. We've got Fulton County. Again, we've got that early vote from Fulton County. But some dynamics we're going to be looking for over the next couple hours, I can just set them up right now, is if you go north of Fulton County, you go to these two counties right here, Cherokee and Forsyth counties. These are the two biggest Republican vote-producing counties in the state of Georgia. And this gets to one of those dynamics you were just talking about a minute ago. This is absolutely key to any chance Herschel Walker has here tonight. Because if you're a Republican and you're going to win in in Georgia, you don't just win these counties, you win them in landslides. And you could see how Herschel Walker did in Forsyth County back in November. He beat Warnock by a 34-point margin. That's good, but now compare that to how Brian Kemp did in the governor's race. Right. He won by a 46-point margin here. That's, again, just do the math here. It was a 37,000 vote difference statewide. Warnock got 37,000 more votes than Walker did statewide. Just look at the difference in these margins. Walker won this county by 33,000 votes and change. We call it 34,000 votes. Kemp won this same county, look at that, by 47,000 votes. It's a 13,000 vote difference right there. And again, all Walker needed to do was get 37,000 more votes, and he would have caught Raphael Warnock. So underperforming in these big Republican counties was a huge problem for Herschel Walker. So we want to see what he's counting on. In Cherokee, I can show you the exact same dynamic. Walker won this county by 38 points. Look how Brian Kemp did. He won it by 50. That's a huge difference there in terms of what they're netting for votes here. So we want to see as those counties come in, and we should get some numbers. Forsyth reported its first batch at about 7:30 p.m. last time around. That's one thing we're looking at. You know, can Walker, he had Kemp campaigning with him this time. His campaign says that will help them get the turnout and get those Republicans in places like that to vote for him this time around.
Steve, thank you. We will be checking back in with you as we see those counties light up and as votes continue to come in. Chris, you were interrupted there as we were starting to get in our first results. But what both Joy and Nicole were describing is absolutely being borne out in those at least those very preliminary results that we're seeing thus far.
Well, and I think it speaks to enduring strangeness and self-defeating strangeness of the Maga era of the Republican Party, which we are very much still in, which is for petulant, petty, and ridiculous reasons, the ex-president, who's the leader of the party, whose business was convicted on 17 counts today, has decided that a voting method is anathema, ideologically, tribally to him. And that anyone who is devoted to him,
absentee,
yes, absentee, should not partake in it. And it is just, I mean, you just talk to anyone in a campaign, it's like, well, if you could have the thing now, or you could have it in a week, like, why don't you just give it to me now? Like, how would you feel about someone giving you $100? Like, would you like it now? Or would you like it in 8 days? You probably want it now. And he's going around being like, wait, and it's driving them all. They're driving them all nuts. They're driving them all nuts.
The reason that never works, and the reason that people who work in campaigns love absentee and early voting is what if it rains? Right. Like, this is the thing we used to obsess about on the campaign is, oh my God, what if it rains?
Or you get a flat tire or anything.
Anything. And if election day, yeah, right, you trip and fall and, you know, break your knee. Like, anything could happen on election day. And so what, especially for African-American voters, it's a big deal. That's why Raphael Warnock's campaign sued the state of Georgia to get that Saturday voting, because most of the strategy for Democratic candidates is to get out a huge early vote and to run up the score so that Republicans have to try to make it up on election day. And it used to be that Republicans used to do the same thing with absentee, and now they don't.
Let me interrupt here just for a second. I apologize, but Steve was telling us to watch Cherokee County, and I think I memorized the shape of it, and I think that little red dot over there means that we've got some Cherokee County.
Yeah, it looks like we just got the early in-person vote from Cherokee County, and take a look here. Also, there might be some mail in this mix as well, and I think that's critical because, again, remember, these are the best numbers. When you're talking the early vote and you're talking the mail vote, you're talking the best numbers that Warnock's going to get. So right now, Warnock, with this first big batch, and it accounts for about 40% of all the vote that's going to come out of Cherokee County here, Warnock is running at 37.7%. He got 29% here back in November. Walker, you can see again, we just showed you 67.6 is what Walker got. He's running at 62.3 right now. I mean, this in a nutshell is the ball game for Walker. This is a winning number for a Republican statewide in Georgia, what Brian Kemp did in Cherokee County. Cherokee County is the #1 plurality-producing county for Republicans in the entire state of Georgia. In fact, Cherokee County is one of the biggest plurality-producing counties for Republicans in any state in the country. That's how significant this county is for Republicans. You're talking about 45 minutes north of Atlanta here, sort of the fringes of the Atlanta metro area. It's core Republican. It's become a little bit less Republican with time. Kemp won this thing overwhelmingly. If you're Walker, this wasn't enough This is enough, and you don't have to get 74% out of Cherokee, because Kemp won with a margin over Stacey Abrams. He beat her by 8 points statewide. But if you're Walker, your target in a county like this is definitely to be over 70%. So what this sets the stage for is getting that pre-election day vote. That's essentially what they just reported out in Cherokee County. This is as good as it's going to get for Raphael Warnock in Cherokee County. This is probably as bad as it's going to look for Herschel Walker. But that election day vote, how much of it is there? How many turned out in Cherokee County today? Is it enough to get Walker back to 67.6%? If that's all it is, that's probably not going to be enough for him. He's got to go above 67.6%. He's got to land somewhere probably north of 70%. He's got to do that in Cherokee County, and there are a bunch of other counties. As I said, next door, Forsyth County is a huge one. Just south of Atlanta, Fayette County is another one. It looks like Douglas County, we may have just gotten some vote in now. Here's another one. This is a pretty big, and this is a county. Boy, this county's been on, like a lot of the Atlanta metro area, a political journey over the last generation or so, away from the Republican Party toward the Democratic Party. And you can see Warnock carried this with almost 2/3 of the vote, 64.8%. They released the early vote here in Douglas County, and there's Warnock now sitting. That's his baseline. His baseline is almost 70% for tonight. So what's going to happen in Douglas County is the remainder of the vote, most of the remainder of the vote is going to be the election day vote. It's going to be what people went out and did in person at the polls today. And we want to see in Douglas County that Warnock number figures to come down as the election day vote is cast. Does it come down all the way to 64.8% or lower? That's what Walker needs it to do. Or does it come down and land north of 64.8%? That would be great news for Warnock, taking a core Democratic county and actually improving on his performance from the general election. So again, you're getting, in a lot of these big counties right now, these are sort of the baseline numbers for the night. They're generally going to be the best they get for Democrats, the worst they get for Republicans. But you want to see as they come in, you want to compare them to how they looked back in November. And anywhere where Warnock is landing above where he finished in November, that's a good sign for him. And for Walker, anywhere, obviously, where he's landing below where he finished, it would be a very bad sign for him. So, again, we're just there's just waiting and making sure nothing else big has kind of lit up here in the last few minutes. We can actually take a look. Doherty County, this is where Albany is. This county has the largest black population of any county in Georgia. This is 70% African-American. You can see Warnock here again in the early vote getting about 82%. I think you were talking about this. This was, if there was one concern for Democrats that emerged from the general election in Georgia, it was that black turnout relative to previous midterms was down, and you could see it in a county like Doherty County. So you could see Walker, obviously, Warnock won it overwhelmingly here. And again, in the early vote here, he's now over 80%. But this is a county where it's not just for the Democrats, it's not just about winning it by a big margin. It's also seeing if they can improve upon their turnout in a place like Doherty County relative to November. That was one of the things we saw in the runoff last year that got Warnock elected. Warnock increased, and the Democrats increased black turnout from the 2020 general election to the 2021 Senate runoff. They're trying to do the same thing again this year. This is one of the counties you would look for it in. Another county you'd look for it in. Again, we showed you a few minutes ago, this is a small county. This is Mitchell County, but here's another, it's a great example of where the drop-off in black turnout hurt Democrats last November, because this is the result in Mitchell County from last November. There's a large black population here. Walker won this county, you could see, by basically 15 points. In the Senate runoff last year, when Warnock got elected over Kelly Loeffler, Loeffler only won this county by 5 points. So that's the difference between losing it by 15 or losing it by 5. That's the difference for Democrats between having really strong black turnout and disappointing black turnout. And there are a lot of counties, especially in southwest Georgia, where this dynamics obtains. And so that's going to be one of the things we look for tonight. You know, again, even in a county that might go Republican, you know, Warnock, if he gets high black turnout, doesn't have to lose Mitchell County by 15 points. He could lose it by 5. He could lose it by 4. Obviously, that's one of his campaign's goals tonight. And I'm just seeing we're getting a few more votes in here. Clayton County, overwhelming. I think this is the single most Democratic county in the state. Clayton was, I'm not quite sure here. It doesn't look like they released all their early vote at once. They may actually be reporting out some of their same-day vote, but we're getting a taste there of Clayton County. Rockdale County here, again, in that Atlanta metro area, a county that's gone more and more Democratic over the last generation or so. Again, you're getting your early vote reported out in Rockdale County here. Warnock, you could see, this is his baseline for the night, 81%. He wants to finish above where he got, at least where he was at, and probably a little bit above where he finished in November, which was 73%. So, again, all these early vote reports coming in statewide now. We have 15% of the vote, and Warnock with that early advantage of 23 points statewide. But, again, a lot of that with early vote from big counties.
Steve, thank you. And again, the big sort of narrative summation at this point is that, as we expected, a lot of counties, we're seeing counties all over the state, are reporting vote that they were able to start counting this morning at 7 a.m. when polls open. So that's going to be ballots, absentee ballots that were dropped off or mailed in. They were able to get those early votes pre-canvassed, essentially, pre-counted, so that right when the polls closed, they could report those numbers. Those numbers were always expected to be heavily Democratic, and Republicans are really counting on the votes that were cast today, on same-day votes being the ones that are going to make up all those numbers for them. Republicans, anecdotally and in their sort of meta equivalent of the spin room today, have been pounding their chests and saying that they saw great voter turnout on Election Day today. They think their numbers are going to be huge when the same-day vote gets counted. They've been very confident along those lines. We're going to look at those claims, get some independent observation as to whether or not those claims might be warranted. We're going straight to Georgia when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special election coverage of tonight's U.S. Senate race in Georgia. We've got about 18% of the vote in. Polls closed about 26 minutes ago in Georgia. Just about 18% of the vote in. This race is too early to call. At this point, Senator Raphael Warnock leads Herschel Walker in the vote that we have in, but it is too early to call. Neither of these candidates is projected as actually leading this race in terms of how it is going to ultimately run out. But we are getting vote in fast and furious. We'll be checking in with Steve Kornacki as he gets new results from new counties. Joining us now from Georgia, from Raphael Warnock campaign headquarters, is Greg Bluestein. He's a politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And one of the things he's been following today is information and confidence on both sides about voter turnout in this race. Greg, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all,
and we're definitely hearing some cautious optimism right now.
I was just going to say, tell us what you're hearing at Warnock headquarters and how they're feeling, what the vibe is there.
Yeah, I just heard from a senior Warnock advisor who said the numbers are looking good for their campaign, but wait for an hour to start celebrating, at least an hour, as more of these numbers start to come in. They're seeing signs that Senator Warnock is overperforming his numbers from the November midterm, where, as Steve just mentioned, he fared very well and actually got more vote total than Herschel Walker. If he continues to overperform these numbers, it's hard to see any path to victory for Herschel Walker.
Hey, Greg, Ari Melber. Habit is a big part of voting, and runoffs usually are unusual, but now they've become more traditional, plus all the ad spending seemed to boost awareness. What are you seeing on the ground going into today about whether this has become a bit of a recent tradition and whether you see that being high turnout numbers today?
That's such a good point. Think about it this way. Senator Warnock's supporters have now gone to vote for him 5 times since November 2020. It's hard to believe that, but that's the case. So there is this ingrained pattern for many of his allies, his supporters here in Georgia, who are used to voting again and again and again for Senator Warnock, whereas, of course, Herschel Walker is a first-time candidate, and Republicans came off demoralized from the last runoff a year ago here.
Greg, in terms of the sort of spin room dynamic today, we've heard some reporting over the last couple of hours that Republicans, they knew that the early voting numbers might be counted first and that they knew that the early voting numbers would be sort of glum for them. But we have heard real expressions of confidence on the Republican side that they feel like the same day, Election Day voter turnout was strong, maybe even stronger than they expected. What can you tell us about that, those expressions of confidence on the Republican side? Is that spin, or is that based on data that looks the same way to independent observers?
Well, it's based on data because we know that more than 1.3 million people, according to the Secretary of State's office, have voted on Election Day, and that exceeds a lot of the projections for many of the analysts out there. It could be approaching $1.4 million voters when it's all said and done. That could be very good news for Herschel Walker because, as you've mentioned, he's depending on big Election Day turnout. But we don't know where this turnout's going to come from. We know that in DeKalb County, one of the most important Democratic strongholds in Georgia, there was a huge Election Day turnout, and that obviously favors Senator Warnock. So we could see a surge in Election Day turnout that ends up nullifying Republican advantage, but it's still too early to tell.
And Greg, we all covered during the compressed early voting period that was allowed before this runoff, really long lines around the state, long lines that lasted throughout the whole early voting period, which is, as I said, was shorter than it usually was, or than it was in previous elections, but was still quite a few days when people had a chance to early vote. Is there any indication that those long lines might have been dissuading to voters? They might have been suppressive?
Yeah, there were long lines, and of course it was soggy weather, too, in most parts of Georgia, so that affected some of the turnout as well. But the average wait time was just a few minutes across the state of Georgia. Of course, that's rural areas and, of course, busier, more populous polling sites in metro Atlanta as well. We saw lines as long as 45 minutes, closer to an hour in some parts of the state. We sent reporters to one particular spot in Cherokee County in the exurbs that had a particularly long line. But in general, state elections officials and voting rights advocates say that the process has been relatively smooth.
Greg Bluestein, politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, MSNBC political contributor at Warnock headquarters. I have a feeling we're going to be back with you over the course of the night. Greg, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
All right. And as we have been talking, I'm seeing Steve's board fill up with red and blue weird shapes. Steve, are you getting any full counties in? Are we still looking mostly at early and absentee votes?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things I can show you here. First of all, just literally within the last 2 minutes, two giant counties, two of the biggest in the state, reported out a ton of early vote here. One is Cobb County here, you can see, and this includes, we believe, the mail-in vote. Again, this is a county that, look, if you went back to 2012, this was a Republican county in presidential elections. Now, the Warnock number is extremely high here. He won this thing by 16 points. So, again, I think this is the mail is taking up a significant chunk of this here. But, you know, this number here that Warnock got in 2022 just is part of a long trajectory in Cobb County going back a generation or so toward the Democratic Party. So, again, anything above 57% there is incredible news for Warnock's campaign. The other biggie, we just got in a big chunk from Gwinnett County. This is one of the fastest growing counties in the state. It's got nearly 1 million people right now. And again, it's another one of these counties. If you went back not that long ago, this was a Republican bastion. Again, you're looking at a mix here, I think, of early and mail vote. So this is very Democratic friendly. So Walker does stand to improve as the same day vote gets added to the mix. But can he improve enough to hit that number at least that he hit in the general election back in November? These counties, especially in the Atlanta metro area, if Warnock is exceeding what he got back in November, I mean, this is where the votes are just numerically. So some of these are just, you know, Gwinnett is a giant. Now, in terms of completed counties, we do have one that looks like this is a very small county. But I'll just flag this one because this is as Republican as it gets in Georgia, just in terms of the percentages. Brantley County has the highest percentage of any of these 159 counties in Georgia. Brantley County has the highest percentage of white voters without college degrees. It is 87% white non-college. And we've talked about how that gap between white voters with degrees, white voters without college degrees, that partisan gap has been getting wider and wider. White voters without college degrees are a huge core Republican constituency. They make up nearly 90% of the electorate in this county, this small county. And I think one thing that's interesting is there may still be a few same-day votes left to come in, but we've basically got, I think, already all the vote here. And Walker is running above his November level by about 1.3 points right here. And also, I think of note, if you look at the level of turnout, the 5,038, it's like a small county here, but more than 5,500 votes cast. Again, that turnout level in this small county is very close to the turnout level for the November general election. Now, this is one small county. This is something Walker needs to multiply by like 50, because there are a bunch of counties around the state, not quite as overwhelmingly Republican as this, but small, very Republican counties where what his campaign needs to get out of today is big turnout and to improve on how he finished in the November general election. So you are seeing that in Brantley County. On the other end of the spectrum, by the way, other end of the sort of degree spectrum is this county right here. Oconee County. This is right outside Athens, where the University of Georgia is. This has the highest concentration of white voters with college degrees of any county in the state. It's actually a Republican county, but it's the county where Walker, one of the counties where Walker lagged the worst behind Brian Kemp in the November election. You could see Kemp won this county by 48 points. Walker only won it by 34. You see right now Walker, with the early vote in Oconee County is up by 26 over Warnock. This is one of those counties where, again, Walker's got to get close to 70% here. He's got to get past what he got in November. He's got to get close to 70%. This is his starting point tonight, 63% with that early vote that's counted right there. And one other, I think that we have a good chunk of the vote in here, is Sumter County. Again, you're looking at early vote here. This is a majority black county. It's 51% African American. This is also famously the home of Plains, Georgia. Jimmy Carter's hometown is in this county, the former president. What you're looking at here, again, is the most Democratic-friendly share of the vote here. Warnock carried this county by 3 points back in November. When Warnock got elected to the Senate in that runoff back in January of 2021, his margin here was 6 points. So again, this is one of those counties where we talked about how Democrats were a little bit disappointed with what they were able to get in terms of black turnout in the November general election. This is one of those counties where you saw it. Warnock had won it by 6 points. His margin was only 3 in November. His starting point tonight with the early vote is a 16-point advantage over Walker. We'll see as the same day comes in, but this is the benchmark. Does it land closer to 6 or closer to 3? If it's anywhere, where that 6 was, that's great news for Warnock. If it's 3 or less, obviously, that becomes more of a problem, a concern for him, and that becomes more good news for Walker. But again, that's that dynamic. This whole region in the state in particular, that dynamic of African-American turnout and whether it changes the results in these counties from November is something we're going to be keeping a close eye on. Look, more than a third of the vote is in now in Georgia. Again, we said expect Warnock to have a big lead. He does right now. The question is, you got a glimpse of it in that small county I showed you, Brantley County. There's a lot of small Republican, and we just got a big batch from a big Republican-friendly batch. I'm very curious where that came in. Oh, okay. They're retabulating. That's what it is. That number we had showed you a minute ago in Cobb County. Cobb County, there may have been an error in our system in terms of that vote, because that did look a little. We were showing you the 78% that Warnock was running at with that early batch. Even though that's a core Democratic county now, that seemed very high. So there might have been an error there in our data entry. So they're checking on that one right now. So what that has done is it's pulled the statewide margin back here to 55-45 right now for Warnock over Walker.
So, Steve, I'm reluctant to ask you a follow-up question if the board just did something funky. But looking back again, comparing what we're looking at tonight to what we saw last month in November when we got to this runoff election in the first place, when there was about a third of the vote in November, can we do an apples-to-apples comparison in terms of how these two candidates are doing now versus then?
The problem right now is we know that the composition of the early vote is different, demographically different this time around. So we knew coming into tonight that these were going to probably be more Democratic-friendly numbers in these initial batches, because you could see it. Georgia's one of the states, one of the few states where you register voters and there's a record of the race, the gender of the voter, and so you knew from the early voting data that was available that there were more African-American voters as a percentage of the electorate in the early vote this time around than there were in the run-up to November, for instance. So we had a strong sense these numbers were going to be more Democratic-friendly. They certainly have been so far, so they're meeting that expectation. It just creates that variable of what does the same-day vote look like, in some of these counties. It's good. Clearly, it's good for Walker to have a shot at this thing. It's going to have to be enormous. It's going to have to be. I showed you one tiny little county right there. That's going to have to multiply by dozens for Walker to have a shot tonight.
All right, with about 35% of the vote in, it is too early to call in this crucial Georgia U.S. Senate race. Our special election coverage continues right after this. Stay with us. It is election night again. Too early to call in the big U.S. Senate race in Georgia tonight. We've got about 31% of the vote in. This is where the vote stands right now. Again, the important bottom line here for the decision desk is that this is too early to call. Let's go back to Georgia now to MSNBC national correspondent Tremaine Lee, where the party is still going on at a Get Out the Vote event across the street from a polling place he's been at in Atlanta. Tremaine, it does still, even though polls are closed, it looks like things are still happening.
Rachel, it's election night. The party won't be over for a long time until at least folks have an answer about the Senate race here. And you think about Georgia is poised to elect its first black senator for a full-time term ever in history. And what got Georgia purple was a lot of organizing on the groundwork. And I want to bring in one of those organizers, Deborah Scott, CEO of Georgia Stand Up, We Vote, We Win. Deborah, what has it taken, all the work, to organize voters around these very critical elections?
It really took the effort of a lot of coalition people working together, coalition organizations working together. And it really took door knocking on doors, talking to people, and having those one-on-one conversations at the doors and at events, and asking people, what do they care about, and making sure that they understand that these issues are really about them and that they really have the power. So it's not about who is going to be elected, it's who is going to serve you best. And so we began to talk to them about those issues. And so it took door knocking, organizations working together, it took calls, it took it all. And one of the things that we did is in reference to SB 202, is we brought the food to them. We brought the fun to them. And this is voter joy. We don't have voter apathy here. We have voter joy. We've been happy all day because we know when we vote, we win.
What did it take in this shorter time frame, though? The runoff election cut from 9 weeks just a year ago to just 4 weeks. How that changed the game?
It changed the game tremendously, but when you're organized and you know how to mobilize your people, it was easy because we worked together and we made it happen.
That's right. Rachel?
Hey, sis, this is Joy Reid. I have a question for you because you guys were knocking on doors. We know that there were 77,000+ voters who did not participate in November, who did participate in this runoff election. I'm wondering if you encountered any of those folks and if they told you why they came out now. I mean, in November, they had the opportunity to elect the first black woman governor. You had Warnock on the ballot. Do you have any sense of what the difference was now?
I think the difference was we really focused on the voter and focused not just on what was happening in this country and what's happening in the world, but we focused on the voter and made sure that they understood that they were the most important thing. And so, and we kept knocking and calling and asking them to turn out and turning their families out. So the difference was having that real conversation with those voters about those issues and having their friends and family call them.
Tremaine Lee with us from Atlanta tonight with Deborah Scott from Georgia Stand Up, We Vote, We Win. Those are the folks who turned that voter joy out across the street from that polling place tonight. It's great to have you both with us. Thank you as we continue to get these results in tonight during our coverage of this U.S. Senate race in Georgia. Steve, are you gesticulating because you have new vote?
We do. We're starting to get, and again, this is, I think an interesting dynamic is potentially starting to emerge here. So let me just take you through a couple things that we're starting to see. Again, go down to South Georgia here. We were showing you a few minutes ago Brantley County, which is a very small but very Republican county. Here's a similar county, again, overwhelmingly Republican. And what's interesting here is there's still vote to come. And we believe that's election day vote to come. And just take a look here at how it went in November. Walker got 83.5%. He's already running at 85%, and there is still vote to come. We believe election day vote that, will be overwhelmingly, we expect, Walker vote. So this is, we showed you it in Brantley County. You're seeing it here in Berrien County as well. And you look at the turnout level. This is on pace with what's left to be very close to the November general election number. So that's 2 counties now, 2 of these small rural counties, where Walker looks like he's going to be exceeding what he got in November and getting really good election day turnout. Here's another very small one in North Georgia, far North Georgia. Again, this is a place, Towns County is a place where core Republican Walker underperformed Kemp in the general election back in November. He got 78.3, Kemp got 84.5. Tonight it looks like Walker's going to land better, 2 points better than he landed in November. So, he needs at least that kind of improvement over his November number. He may be hitting in a place like Towns his bare minimum. We're also getting, here's a bigger county. This is where Valdosta is in South Georgia. And this is an interesting one again. This is a Republican county. Walker won it, as you can see here, by 18 points in the general election. When Warnock got elected, especially in the runoff in January of 2021, he was able to hold Kelly Loeffler, Warnock was, to a 12-point margin here. What we got left here is same-day votes. So you can expect that Walker number is going to rise. And is Walker on pace here to get something similar to what he got in November, and ideally, from his standpoint, to beat it? He may very well have a chance to do that here. So the picture that's starting to emerge is outside of the Atlanta metro area. And the Atlanta metro is a huge part of the state, but outside of it, especially in these rural Republican areas we're showing you, the early indications we're getting are favorable to Walker in terms of turnout and in terms of building on what he was able to get in the November general election. That said, the Atlanta metro area is a huge, huge part of the story here. Fast growing, it's where the population is, and what we mainly have in the Atlanta metro area, again, just showing you, for example, Fulton County here, biggest in the state. Okay, 10%, 11% of the vote's going to come out of just this one county. All we have right now to go on in these counties is the early vote, and we do see Warnock doing better in the early vote this time around than he did back in November. So there's that variable of what the same-day turnout is going to look like, but the possibility here exists of Walker potentially having a very good night in rural Georgia and Warnock having a very good night in metro Atlanta, again, relative to the November general election. So you're seeing either campaign, I think, right now could take a look at this map and what's filling in so far and find something encouraging and something discouraging to point to. If you're the Warnock campaign, you're encouraged by these early voting numbers you're seeing, these early voting results you're seeing out of a Fulton County, or I'm showing you out of a Gwinnett County. Again, there's nearly 1 million people now live in Gwinnett County, and Warnock's starting point tonight is going to be 68.5%. If he lands anywhere above in Gwinnett County what he did in November, that alone could offset a lot of good performances for Walker in a lot of these much, much smaller red counties. So you're seeing, from the Warnock campaign standpoint, you're seeing very positive early indications from the Atlanta metro area. And from what we're starting to see, it's early, but from what we're starting to see from rural Georgia, you're seeing some encouraging signs for the Walker campaign as well, which adds up potentially, to a close race.
It's fascinating. I mean, we're heading into this. Obviously, we're looking at polls that are tighter than the margin of error in almost every instance. And now here we are on election night watching those results come in. And it's good news for the Republicans and also good news for the Democrats.
Well,
coming down to it.
An amazing part of this Herschel Walker candidacy, and I say this with all due respect, is it's an unusual and at times troubled candidacy, which even Republicans have said. And Mitch McConnell talked about candidate equality. And I'm reminded they used to talk about yellow dog Democrats, which just meant people who were so partisan they would sooner vote for a yellow dog than a Republican. And you kind of get this partisan feeling here, especially in some of the places Steve just walked us through, where even with, I think, Herschel Walker's well-established candidate problems. We've covered them. I think the audience knows them. There was personal scandals. There's trouble expressing himself. There's a lack of interest in the government powers that he would wield, among other things. That was a capsule summary.
It was a nice summary.
We are seeing some Republicans, will follow the numbers all night, who are saying, I heard about that. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of his positions and his hypocrisy on choice, but they're going for him anyway. It's sort of a test of that partisan line.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is that's been kind of fascinating to me is the person who has spoken the most about Herschel Walker's candidacy is not Herschel Walker, it's Lindsey Graham. And the case that Lindsey Graham has been making to those voters, they're saying it's a team vote, not an individual vote, right? Yeah. So, but he hasn't even really been making that case. He's literally gone out and said, And he's not talking to black voters. Let's just be clear. Lindsey Graham has no currency among black folks. He's talking to white voters. And he's saying, vote for Herschel Walker. Not because Herschel Walker will be good for Georgia. He's never said that. Not vote for Herschel Walker because of abortion, even though this is a state where abortion's not an issue. I've said the X factor in the election, the reason I never believed the red wave thing, I never believed it because of abortion. And I'm like, abortion is such a superordinate factor that I never believed you could have a red wave with abortion being throttled. But that's not an issue in Georgia. Georgia is a state with a 6-week abortion ban. That wasn't on the ballot. So here is a state where you could purely test your theory about MAGAism, right, and its currency. Lindsey Graham didn't say vote for him because of MAGA. He said vote for him so we can prove we're not racist.
Yes.
That was his main selling point. He's saying, didn't say vote for him because he would do great things in the Senate, he would get abortion rights, he would do these policy things. He said vote for him because it would make young black folks around the country want to be Republicans, it would inspire people of color to be Republicans, and it would prove we're not racist.
But he did.
Well, that's a hell of an argument to make.
And he did it while infantilizing the candidate.
Correct.
Sitting shoulder to shoulder. It was the most ludicrous. Not only was the message ludicrous, but the delivery was something that if there weren't a million things breaking every day, I think would have been scrutinized.
And the thing is, and I have to say this, because while I was down there, the word I heard the most, particularly from black voters in Georgia, was representation. Because if there are only two people running, they're both black. The one that proves, if you want to say that proves America is not racist, is clearly Warnock.
Right.
Warnock is an intelligent, articulate man who can speak fluidly, who understands the job of being a senator, who's doing the job of being a senator.
Gotten a bunch of bills passed, for
Gotten
example.
a bunch of bills passed that help Georgia. He's talking about we need more hospitals. Hospitals are closing. It's a big issue in the state. He's on that issue. He's like, we need to talk about big agriculture and what it's. He's talking about. Herschel Walker can barely put a sentence together. Herschel Walker literally, without any irony, used the word, and I'm sorry to say this word on television, coon, as a compliment about himself.
And don't believe us. Mitch McConnell said they have a candidate quality issue.
And so you're saying, Lindsey Graham, this is a great lesson for Republicans. The answer to solving your demographic problem is not to put forward a candidate like this of such low quality. It's an insult to black people, and they felt insulted.
All right, we've got much more still to come as we are watching the vote getting counted in this crucial Senate runoff race in Georgia. Take a quick break. We will be right back. Welcome back to our election night coverage here of this big, important U.S. Senate race in the great state of Georgia. Polls have been closed in Georgia for almost exactly 1 hour. We are getting in vote from all across the state. As you see here, this race is too early to call. About 42% of the vote is in. The reason we've been able to get in 42% of the vote in just 1 hour is because counties are allowed to start counting early votes that were dropped off, votes that were mailed in as of 7 a.m. on Election Day. They're able to start that count. And so by the time the polls close at 7 p.m., they're able to report a lot of that early, previously cast vote. That means, in general, there are exceptions, but in general, it means that the vote that is still to come is likely to be same-day vote, people who turned out on Election Day and cast their votes today. That creates a little bit of a partisan dynamic in the flow of information out of the counties tonight as we put these vote totals together. Again, the earlier vote totals are likely to be more favorable to the Democratic candidate. The later vote totals likely to be more favorable to the Republican candidate. As you see right here, it is too early to call with 42% of the vote in. Steve, in terms of where the vote is in from and those dynamics that you've been describing over the past hour, I mean, it seems to me that basically what you were saying is that in very heavily Republican places, Walker's doing even better than he was doing in November. And in very heavily Democratic places, maybe Warnock is doing better than he did in November.
Yeah, we're seeing and we're starting to get more. Again, you see a lot of red here because the vast majority of counties in Georgia are going to be Republican counties. A lot of them are small, a lot of them are rural, and we are starting to get more of the complete Rural parts of the state alone are not going to win this for him. If he's going to actually win this election, he's going to have to show progress in Metro Atlanta and in those big Republican vote-producing counties we've been highlighting. And the question there is, what's the same day going to look like?
Steve, thank you. I should tell you, we did just get in a little giblet of reporting from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They're reporting that Fulton County officials are telling them to expect all the early and absentee vote to be counted in Fulton County by 10, and all the votes in Fulton County to be done by midnight. So I don't know what that exactly tells us in terms of when we're going to get a call in this race and how late we're going to be here, but that's at least that from AJC.
I mean, one of the things that's clear, I think, this early in the night, we're only an hour in, is like, it's a close race.
Yeah.
And, you know, just to take a step back without knowing the outcome in what is essentially a sort of coin flip situation, right? When you look at some of the states that, you know, Trump had won and then went to Biden, and then you looked at what happened in this last midterm. Particularly, I'm thinking about Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. We saw states where, across the board, right, Democrats made gains. I mean, Arizona is sort of a remarkable situation, which they won all these statewide races. You know, across, they basically won the entire slate in Arizona. In Michigan, a clean sweep. In Pennsylvania, had the gubernatorial and Senate by 5. That wasn't the case in Georgia. Republicans had a very good day on election night in Georgia, with the exception of Raphael. Right now, Raphael Warnock has worked in defiance of political gravity that pulled the rest of Democratic candidates back down in a state that was able to buck some of the trends that happened otherwise. It's a testament to what a remarkably talented politician Raphael Warnock has been, and as a senator, that we're now in election 4 in the span of 2 years, a guy who had never run for office before in a state this closely divided. What he has been able to do as, let's be clear, not playing the role of some Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema on the national stage, in which what he does is performatively pick fights with the Democratic Party, in staying very much true, I think, to what I think would be fairly characterized as his, like, core progressive values as a senator from a dead center swing state. Like, he is pulling off a remarkable feat of political magic thus far in his very young and early career, without even knowing what happens this evening.
And in substantive terms, he's considered, you know, they do those bipartisanship rankings of senators. I think he's considered to be like 18th most bipartisan senator, but he's also been a full-throated champion on voting rights and on abortion rights and on other causes.
And on the big Biden, you know, on the big issues of the Democratic agenda, he has been a steady vote.
His big deal was the insulin bill. Right. I mean, his big thing was the insulin.
The bipartisan Senate scorecard has become kind of funny because you get to be 17th now. He's proud of saying in Georgia, which is a Republican state, he should be saying it. 17th most bipartisan senator. They don't do anything. It's like they're scoring 2 or 3 votes in the year to get you to that. In 25 years ago, to be the 17th, it meant you were doing business across the aisle all the time, and they were all. I mean, you know, there were 80% of them who were very active across the aisle, and now it's such a rare outcome that these statistics are just a laugh. I mean, it's just a joke. It's nice that he can take that to Georgia and say, I'm the 17th most bipartisan, but he's also more liberal than, you know, 90% of the Democratic senators of a generation ago.
Yes.
Right? So,
well, that's why it's a magic trick. I mean, this to me is why it's such an incredibly impressive feat. Because what he has shown is, in his voting agenda, he has been quite liberal and progressive. In his tone and in his affect and in his favorability ratings, again, in a down the line 50-50 state, in fact, a state that veered Republican in the last election, he has stayed above water and defied that political gravity through a tremendous amount of political talent.
Of the votes cast in that last election, remember, there were 3 names on the board this time of night, one of them being a kind of libertarian candidate. Those voters, you would think, would be more likely to tip to the Republican, and certainly would tip to the Republican if it were not Herschel Walker. But what that means is, to get that little, you know, I think it was 1.5% or something like that of those votes that were available, that's a harder grab. For Senator Warnock than it is for Herschel Walker. It's harder for him to get those.
The bigger political story, though, and again, we don't know the results, but the margins that he's running up, and again, I remember 2004 being on the other side, the margins that he's running up in these counties that are some of the fastest changing counties in the country, along with Maricopa and some of those counties in Arizona that you're talking about. that will be the sort of the enduring opportunity for President Joe Biden when he runs again. I mean,
You mean previously Republican
I mean,
stronghold counties in Georgia that are,
When Biden won, I think all the Democrats felt endangered, and people like Raffensperger and Kemp made a choice, and they didn't make the choice that the Walker backers made. They went against Trump, and that is how they had a very good night. That is how they defied the national trends. Walker's on the other side of that divide.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, this is just what you're saying is the reason that Democrats want to move Georgia up. I mean, Georgia is one of those states. Arizona and Georgia for a long time were states that Democrats had their eye on. This is since the early 2000s as places they could play. North Carolina is another one. But one of the reasons they would really love to move Georgia up early in the presidential primary calendar is it's become a source of real statewide opportunity. Because let's not forget, the other senator is also a Democrat. So there are two statewide elected Democrats in that state. And candidate quality, you talked about that earlier, Democrats could not have had a better year in terms of picking their candidates. I mean, Shapiro is an excellent candidate. They just had excellent candidates, right? And I think that Warnock is one of the best of the new Democratic stars. He is the pastor of the most prominent church in Atlanta, Dr. King's Church. He's a known quantity. He's from Savannah. He's a lifelong Georgian. You could not have built a better candidate from a kid. And as a senator, he's been picture perfect. He is, we talked about this in the break earlier, in his discipline level, high. Yeah. Very hard to get an interview with him, hard to break him in. Extraordinary. He is a disciplined man. And so I think the problem that Republicans have is, you see it in what Steve is saying, they can only win in the rural places. They can only win with non-college white voters. That is their strategy. All of the cities, including college-educated white voters, those belong to Democrats.
Well, and that's why we're watching so closely the swing counties, to the extent that there are some, and the counties that are in transition, because those are going to be, especially with Warnock targeting Republicans and targeting swing voters so explicitly, that's going to be a big part of the story. Now, former President Obama campaigned for Senator Warnock in Atlanta last week. It made national news when he did it, in part because of the way that the former president talked about Herschel Walker at that event.
Since the last time I was here, Mr. Walker has been talking about issues that are of great importance to the people of Georgia, like whether it's better to be a vampire or a werewolf. This is a debate that I must confess I once had myself when I was 7.
But while President Obama was invited to hit the campaign trail for his preferred candidate, Senator Warnock, it is also notable that the current president, Joe Biden, and the last president, Donald Trump, they pointedly were not invited into Georgia to campaign for their respective favorites. Now, if it's going to be duck, duck, goose deciding which former presidents get to have a role in a big election like this, we're going to need some help figuring that out. Luckily, our colleague Stephanie Rule has just the professionals to ask.
Indeed, I do, Rachel. Duck, duck, goose aficionados and I are here. I am joined by our new colleague, former White House press secretary Jen Psaki, our colleague and friend Simone Sanders Townsend, host of Simone on MSNBC and Peacock, and former RNC chair Michael Steele. Jen, since you were the last to work for our current president, what do you think of the fact that neither President Biden nor President Trump, former President Trump, have been on the campaign trail physically for either of these candidates in a hugely important race?
Well, look, when you're a candidate running a competitive Senate race, you just decide who's going to help you get more voters out. So clearly, both of these candidates decided that the sitting president and the last president was not going to help them. It's not more complicated than that. I will say for President Biden, who I know a little bit better than President Trump, former President Trump, you know, he's somebody who raised a lot of money. That's really what he did. He kind of gets, if he gets a 51st Senate seat, I can tell you, I don't think he really cares that much about whether he's invited to Georgia or not. And this is also pretty common just historically. I mean, the most popular person on the campaign trail in the first midterm election for President Obama was President Clinton, not President Obama. He couldn't go to a lot of places. It's much harder to be president. So I don't know. I think I've talked to the White House about this. They're not too worried about him not being invited. They just want this 51st seat because it will make their lives a lot easier.
But former President Trump is the one who selected Herschel Walker. That's his boy.
Right.
Yet Trump was happy to raise money for Herschel Walker, though not much of that money actually went to him. Trump's own super PAC kept it, but he didn't go to Georgia.
He didn't go to Georgia, and he wanted to go to Georgia, and he threatened to go to Georgia on a number of occasions. And I think you saw, probably more so from the campaign itself, maybe Herschel Walker directly in conversation with the president, saying that it would not help at this time for him to be there. You know, to what Jen said, that reality is true for someone like Herschel Walker with a former president who's unpopular, as it is for a current sitting president who may not be as popular. The difference is, and it's really not that much of a difference. The bottom line is they raise the money. Because at the end of the day, I'll be honest with you, I don't really need you to come into the state if I still get the cash. Right. Dude, if you could just send out an email or a letter, I'm good.
I think there's another difference, too, though. I mean, you know, Donald Trump was radioactive to literally everyone that he handpicked in these primaries, and many of them did not survive in the general election. Meanwhile, these Democratic candidates, they were running on what Democrats got done in many of these places, talking about the work, not necessarily talking about President Biden. And so, look, I think at the end of the day, Georgia is, as one Democratic strategist texted me, Georgia is still Georgia, okay? And you have to, you want to turn people out. And President Obama coming in the next day, which was Friday, he came in on Thursday, on Friday, there was an 18% increase in people going out to vote from the 4 previous days of early voting in the state. He did what needed to be done, understood the assignment, as the children
And they
like to
saw
say.
that in the general, too. They saw those numbers when they brought in President Obama and during the general. There was an uptick in people early voting. There was an uptick in people calling and saying they wanted to volunteer. So they kind of knew it worked. And he's a closer. That's what he likes to do, having worked for him as well. And so they brought him in to be a closer again.
And they each serve their purpose. So you have President Biden, who is going, as the sitting president, is going to get you the cash. You have President Obama is going to get you your people. And for the Republicans, it's President Trump will get you the cash. He'll keep most of it, but he'll get you the cash. But then there are other people who will come in, which is why you saw the cavalcade of senators and former governors, some current governors, running down to help Herschel Walker in place of.
Like do interviews.
But Obama only had one message. Herschel Walker is not a serious person.
But that's exactly how one of the campaign ads that was a closing ad for Warnock and, you know, outside groups was where they basically used Herschel Walker's words over and over again and had voters react to it. Right. It's like when something is self-destructing, you just kind of move out of the way. So strategically, that's what the Democrats did. Look, this is the craziness of the things he said. Just watch his own words. And that's what you heard President Obama do there as well.
Cannot underestimate how offensive Herschel Walker
because it sounds like the one and only Steve Kornacki has some breaking news at the big board.
Steph, thank you very, very much. I do believe that Steve has something. Steve, what do you got?
We do, and let me go back here to the statewide and show you again. More than half the vote now tallied. Warnock leading the statewide count by just under 6 points. Now, we've been talking about Cherokee County, one of those big Republican vote-producing counties where Walker underperformed Brian Kemp significantly in November. We don't have more from Cherokee County, but we've got 2 pretty big-sized counties that are very much of the Cherokee mold here in terms of what they represent politically. So take a look. Number 1, we have all of the votes now in Oconee County. And we said this is a very Republican county. It has the highest concentration of white voters with college degrees. And demographically, if you looked back at the November general election, what group was Walker lagging the most with relative to Kemp? White voters with college degrees. That seemed to be where there was the most reluctance among Republican voters to vote for Kemp and to vote for Walker. So we got all the vote in Oconee, and we can compare it here to November, and what you see is, well, Walker did go up. He went up by 1.3 points, but Warnock went up as well. He went up by 1.4 points. There was a large libertarian vote, relatively speaking, in this county. A lot of people, Republican-friendly voters, who just couldn't pull the lever for Walker, you would assume when you look at a number like that. So actually, Walker's up here, but so is Warnock. This is essentially a wash for Walker. And remember, this is the exact kind of county. Now you're getting to a pretty good-sized county here. This is the kind of county where Walker wants to be running north of 70%. Remember, he doesn't need to get to the Kemp level in these counties. The Kemp level was enough to win by 8 points statewide, but he needs to get closer to it. He probably needed 70%. I think on a night that, if you had asked his campaign to design a good night, I think you want to be at about 70% in this county. This is a wash. Tonight, what he gets out of a Coney compared to the general election in November is a wash. He really didn't make up any ground. Another county very similar. High concentration of white college-educated voters, wealthy, very Republican, a place where Walker lagged relative to Governor Kemp in the general election in November, Glynn County. This is coastal Georgia here, and we've got just about all the vote in from Glynn County. And you can see Walker winning at 61-39. That's actually less than Walker won this county by in the general election. He needs to be doing better than he did in the general election. Instead, he's actually finishing right now, and there are a few more votes to come, but it looks like he's going to come in potentially under what he got in the November general election. On top of that, if you look at the turnout in Glynn County, right now they are running at only 83%. The turnout right now tonight in Glynn County is 83% of what it was in the November general election. Some of these core rural Republican counties I've been showing you where we've got complete vote, you're looking at 90-95% of the general election level. So what you're seeing in Oconee County, what you're seeing in Glynn County, these are, as we say, they're very similar in a way to Cherokee County, to Forsyth County, to places that Walker needs a big night on that we've teed up to look for later on. And there it is. That's the rest of the vote there, it looks like, in Glynn County. So it looks like Herschel Walker is going to finish up short in Glynn County of his November number, and he needs to be north of it. So this is not a good, if you're the Walker campaign, what you're seeing in these two counties, the question was, in a place like this, there were a lot of Republicans who were comfortable voting for Brian Kemp, who were not comfortable voting for Herschel Walker. Were they going to show up? This turnout level suggests a lot of them maybe just didn't show up. And if they did show up, were they going to vote for Walker? And again, this is suggesting he did not make up. Look at this. He ends up less than his November 2022 level here. He ends up less than that in the runoff. And Warnock ends up gaining 2.1 points here in a core Republican county. So those are two troubling signs, I think, right now, if you're the Walker campaign. There's good news for them in the rural areas, and then you get to these bigger, wealthier, Republican-friendly counties. We got two that are complete now, and both of them, those are not good numbers for the Walker campaign. Again, so much rests on a place like Cherokee County, so much rests on a place like Forsyth County, so much rests on a place like Paulding County. We've shown you the early vote numbers from those counties. We haven't gotten anything else, so we still have to see. But in terms of being importance potentially for the Walker campaign, those are concerning numbers we just showed you.
Interesting. Let's go back to Warnock headquarters now. Our friend Jason Johnson is there. He's a professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. He's, of course, an MSNBC contributor. Jason, it is great to see you. We are watching a squeaker unfold here, at least as far as we can tell here at MSNBC headquarters. What's the confidence level like with the Warnock folks?
It's uncharacteristically confident, and I am not used to hearing that from Democrats. They won't say that publicly, but behind closed doors, most people here seem to think that Raphael Warnock is going to win. They think he has been building on the lead that he had from election night, and they pretty much think that the fact that the weather's been bad the last 2 days is going to work in his favor. But, Rachel, I got to point this out. In contrast, I've seen so little enthusiasm and excitement on the side of Republicans since I've been around here. It has been shocking how paltry their response has been to the enthusiasm I've seen from Warnock people.
Jason, one of the things I know that you have been looking into while you've been there is that this isn't, in demographic terms, it isn't just a story of black voters and white voters. Georgia is a very diverse state, and one of the things that the Warnock campaign has done notably in contrast to the Walker campaign, is they really have focused on meeting other communities of color where they are, particularly looking at campaign materials and in other languages and other things that can help them cross different types of demographic and racial lines. What's that been like with the campaign, and do they feel like that effort and that expense has been paying off?
that was part of the strategy for the state Dems all along when they had Bean Wen run against Brad Raffensperger. But it's continued throughout the Warnock campaign. They've got materials in Mandarin. They've got materials in Korean. They've got materials in Spanish. They have so many different materials. There's a part of sort of Metro Atlanta called Buford Highway. Sometimes people call it the Silk Road. There's a lot of Latino and AAIP community people and businesses up there. They've got people on the streets in all of those areas for weeks. They've got campaign materials. There was a viral video, a viral Twitter post earlier today about a group of young AAIP women who went out to a Korean barbecue, and they had materials in Korean. And people there were convinced to vote for Warnock because, like, oh my gosh, he actually prints materials in our language. So that has been an impressive change. You're right. It's not just black and white in Georgia anymore. It's all the other sort of colors of the rainbow. And I think the Democratic Party has finally figured out that that is their key to success in this race.
Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State, MSNBC contributor. Jason, keep talking to folks from the campaign. We'll take any intel that we can get from you. This looks like it may be a long night, and we'll be coming back to you, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, as the vote counts keep coming in, we're going to be going live to a reporter who is at Walker headquarters to check in on the mood there. We continue to watch vote come in from all across the state of Georgia. We're just over the 50% mark now in terms of the total number of vote that is in at 53% of the vote in this race between incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock and his Republican challenger Herschel Walker is too early to call. But alas, the night is young. Stay with us. It is about 90 minutes since the polls closed in the great state of Georgia with 56% of the vote in. This race is too early to call. Look at how tight it is. 56% of the vote in. That's how tight it is right now. Too early to call, and it looks like we are going to be watching this till the very, very end. Joining us now from Republican Herschel Walker's campaign headquarters in Georgia is MSNBC's Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, we have just talked to a couple people at the Warnock headquarters over the course of our coverage tonight. What's the atmosphere like at Walker headquarters?
Right, Rachel, I think Steve just outlined some of those counties there where Walker was not meeting the mark that he was looking for. And I was just messaging literally in the last minute with a source who is a Walker ally here. And he tells me that the hope from the Herschel Walker side of this is that there is going to be lighter Democratic turnout in Fulton and DeKalb County. That in order to pull off a win, the Republican needs to see lighter Democratic turnout in those key Democratic counties. Of course, we don't know how many outstanding ballots are in those counties, which are the greater metropolitan Atlanta area here. And let's be frank here. There was, I wouldn't say optimism coming in tonight from Herschel Walker allies. And so the fact that there is reason to not be pessimistic at this point is notable in itself. I was actually about to just message another source of mine. I looked up and he was back there drinking a beer. I messaged him to say, how many beers so we know the results? And he said, it looks like it'll be several, which again, we were looking at a reality that tonight, Herschel Walker, was very little reason to be encouraged coming in. Herschel Walker had done little to build on what he had constructed over the course of the little more than a year candidacy. Over the course of the last month, even just this weekend, we talked with Cheryl Parso, a woman who had come forward and sat down on the record and on camera with us in an interview in which she alleged over the course of a 5-year relationship that she had with Herschel Walker, she explicitly detailed one particular episode in which she alleges that Herschel Walker physically assaulted her, putting his hand on her chest, neck, and attempting to punch her. That was the storyline heading into Election Day here, this runoff. And why is that even more notable? It's because there wasn't even any pushback from Herschel Walker or his campaign. They had 5 days to respond to these allegations, and they chose not to. Instead, they relied on the likes of Governor Brian Kemp, who was trying to convince Republicans to come out here, not on the basis of Herschel Walker's character to note. He never offered up, what we would call good things about Herschel Walker. Instead, he focused and made the case to Georgians to vote for Herschel Walker because he made the case it would be worth it to them to have a Republican partner up on Capitol Hill. Rachel?
What you're describing, Vaughn, sounds like the strategy of the campaign heading into the runoff was essentially to strip Herschel Walker away from the candidate and try to run him as much as possible as a generic Republican figure who Republican voters could get behind kind of regardless of the specifics of him. I mean, it sounds both cynical but also maybe smart in this environment.
And that's why you saw the likes of Lindsey Graham, Tim Scott, John Kennedy, fellow U.S. senators coming onto the campaign trail with him, in particularly the more rural parts of the state, northern Georgia here in the closing days, to make the pitch that they need a Republican partner up on Capitol Hill. And frankly, I think Steve was right in chronicling over the last days, going back to some of the exit polls from the general election last month, when voters left the polling site, just 34% of Georgians said that they believed Herschel Walker had good judgment, quote, good judgment, just 34% of voters. So the Herschel Walker campaign and allies of Herschel Walker realized that they had to make the case beyond Herschel Walker as a person, because they had a year to do so, and the man himself did nothing to help them on that argument.
Fascinating. MSNBC's Vaughn Hilliard reporting live from Herschel Walker's campaign headquarters. We will be counting down beer by beer and hour by hour and vote by vote until we get there. Vaughn, thank you for your insight tonight. We'll be coming back to you. Let's go back to Steve Kornacki, where, Steve, I know, at least I can surmise we've got more vote coming in.
We do. And just to, let's set this the big picture here first, which is, you see now, this is what we were talking about earlier in the night, that Warnock would jump out to that big lead, and then you would start getting all of the votes, all the same-day votes in particular, from a lot of these small Republican counties. And we are seeing a lot of these small Republican counties that are now completely reported or getting close to being completely reported. And the good news for Herschel Walker is that in a lot of them, he's hitting and exceeding the number he got in November. And just as critically, maybe more critically for him, the turnout level in a lot of these small rural counties relative to the November general election, I'm just looking at our spreadsheet right here, it's really high in a lot of these core Republican counties. So Walker has been chipping away at that Warnock advantage. Remember, in November, when we were watching the flow of the vote, there was a point when Walker actually got ahead of Warnock, then Warnock caught him late. But what this is doing, as these smaller Republican and rural counties really kind of fill in, it's really accentuating the importance for Democrats of the core Atlanta metro area. This is why Warnock had the big lead in the early tally, because a lot of these counties released, as you saw, in real time, they released their early vote. They released their mail vote in big, giant batches. These counties tend to be slower when it comes to reporting out the election day vote. So there's very little election day vote that's actually been tallied and reported out of the Atlanta metro area, except we did just get all of the votes in from one of these counties, and I think this may be significant. This is Rockdale County, and all the vote is now in Rockdale County. And again, this is one of these counties that 2 decades ago was George W. Bush was winning this county by more than 20 points in 2004. Tonight, Raphael Warnock has won it with more than 75%. Two things that are significant about this. Number one, compare it to the general election. Warnock's number's up. It's up 2.5 points. 2.2 points, excuse me. Walker's number is down 0.6 points. This is exactly, just in terms of the result in this county, this is exactly what Warnock's campaign wants to see in every one of these core Democratic counties. They want to take the number they got in November. They want to build on it. They want Walker's number in November to come down. In the one county that's complete now in the Atlanta metro area, the Warnock campaign has succeeded in that. I think just as significantly, talking about the turnout here, again, I'm looking at some of these rural Republican counties. What's the turnout level? I'm seeing 94% of the November turnout. What is it in Rockdale County? It's 91%. So it's not quite as high as you're seeing in some of these rural areas, but it's over 90%. It's close, and Warnock is improving on his number. So again, the Walker campaign, I think, if they're encouraged to be rightly so by what they're seeing out of rural Georgia tonight, one of the key variables, we've talked about the outer Atlanta metro area, those Republican counties, but for Democrats, one of the keys is the election day vote in this blob of blue that you see right here. And we've now got one county where we've seen the election day vote, we've got all the vote in, and in this one county, Democrats have gotten exactly what they were hoping to get. The question now is, can that trend continue for them in these other counties in the immediate Atlanta area?
And Steve, we just heard from Vaughn Hilliard at Walker headquarters that the Republicans close to the Walker campaign are hoping that Democratic turnout will be soft in Fulton and DeKalb County in particular. Now, we don't have enough vote in, as far as I understand it, from those counties to be able to say anything meaningful about what the overall vote turnout is going to be there yet, do we?
Right. No, we have almost nothing in from DeKalb County. I'm showing you this right here. And this is actually, DeKalb County actually produced a larger plurality for Raphael Warnock in November than Fulton County did. DeKalb is smaller population-wise than Fulton County, but just take a look here. This is what it looked like in November, and check out that margin for Warnock over Walker in DeKalb County. So there's a lot of votes still to come out of DeKalb County, and basically nothing's been reported out. In Fulton County, what's happened is we showed you they put out the early vote 7:05, 7:10 p.m., something like that. They've now added to that the vote by mail. So again, you see Warnock leads here, again, overwhelmingly with the most Democratic-friendly votes he's going to get. There are, I think at last check, there's about 3 or 4 precincts in Fulton County. That's nothing. There's about 3 or 4 precincts in Fulton County where we've gotten the Election Day vote. So it remains to be seen. But if Rockdale is any kind of an omen for how the Atlanta metro area is going to go for Democrats, in Rockdale, I think they could be satisfied with that turnout and the fact that Warnock improved on his November showing. If they can replicate that in a Fulton County, if they can replicate that in a Gwinnett, in a Cobb, then I think that would offset what Walker has managed to do in the rural areas. But that's a big if. And again, also those big Republican vote-producing counties north of the immediate Atlanta metro area, those are going to have something to say, too.
I do also just feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just looking at DeKalb County, I mean, at the overall Georgia number right now, we've got over 50%. It's pretty close, right, between the two of them. We have 59% in. It's like 50.1 to 49.9. That has to sort of worry Democrats, I think. 50.2 to 49.8 with 60% in. But in DeKalb County, we're expecting like 300,000 votes out of that. And in DeKalb County, that's a county where Warnock won by 70+%.
Yeah, this is the difference between a Democratic vote, a victory model in Georgia, and a Republican one. The Democratic one depends on a much smaller number of counties producing a much larger share of the vote.
And nothing's in out of DeKalb yet.
Right, out of DeKalb. What we did just get, I think, while you were asking that question, was we got a little bit more in out of Cherokee County. Okay. So this is that one. We were at 39% of the vote in. Now we're up close to 60% of the vote in. And again, this one, the importance of this one is even more than when we started talking at the start of tonight because of what Walker's getting out of the rural areas. And again, to set the stage here, this is what Walker got in November out of Cherokee County. This is the single largest Republican vote-producing county in the state of Georgia, one of the biggest in the country. This is what Brian Kemp got. Again, if you're Walker, I think you want it land tonight at 70% or better in Cherokee County. With this latest update, you can see we're now getting some same-day vote in there. Walker gets close to the level he got in 2020 in November.
Steve, I need to interrupt you just for a second. I'm sorry. We've got a change in the characterization of the race. It had previously been described up to this point of the evening as too early to call, but officially now the decision desk is calling this race too close to call. You see, with 61% of the vote in, Herschel Walker nominally in the lead at this point, less than 20,000 votes between them, 61% in. It is now too close to call rather than too early. Back to you, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I think that what you're seeing out of Cherokee has something to do with that. What you're seeing, let's see here, out of Forsyth County now we've got, these two, Cherokee and Forsyth are number 1 and number 2 in terms of Republican vote-producing counties in the state. And again, it's the exact same storyline here for Walker. 64.8 is what he got in November. 72.3 is what Kemp got. You know, if you're Walker, you want to be somewhere about 68, 69% probably coming out of Forsyth County. There are a lot of same-day votes to come from Forsyth County, so the opportunity exists on paper in both Forsyth and in Cherokee potentially for Walker to move up. We'll see if he does. We'll see how those votes start breaking out, but there's an opportunity there for him in those counties. And we were talking a minute ago, Rachel, about you were talking about DeKalb and Fulton, and by far DeKalb and Fulton produced the biggest Democratic pluralities in the state, and Democrats have a lot to come out of both of those counties. I would say not every one of these Republican counties, I talk about them in terms of there being a lot of small rural Republican counties, and there are a lot of small rural Republican counties, but a lot of these are also good-sized counties, too, where there's a big chunk of the vote to come. Actually, there's now been more to come in from Houston County. Never mind, this is one that the last time I had checked in about 3 minutes ago, we were only at about half the vote. Now we're at nearly 90% of the vote. But you see Herschel Walker here is running ahead of Raphael Warnock. This is a big-sized county. There's still some same-day vote to come in here so that Walker advantage could grow a little bit. But there are some sizable counties here. Here's another. This is where Valdosta is. You know, deep South Georgia here. Again, this is all complete. All of the vote is now in, and you can see, you know, Warnock's up, Walker's up. this is basically a wash relative to November. But the one thing that I think would trouble Democrats about this result is, while this is on par essentially with what happened in November, this is one of those counties, there's a significant black population in this county. And when Warnock won the runoff in January of 2021, when he defeated Kelly Loeffler, the margin here for Loeffler was only 12 points. You know, this is one of those counties where in that runoff, the last runoff that Warnock was involved in, this is one of those counties where Democrats really succeeded in driving up black turnout and in limiting the Republican victory margin. And you see tonight, Walker didn't build on his November number. That's not good for him. But he didn't fall back to a Loeffler number either. That means Democrats didn't increase black turnout in a way that offsets the Republican strength in this county in a way they were hoping to. So those are some of the spots here. We could talk about DeKalb and Fulton, and they are going to be absolutely crucial to Warnock if he pulls this off tonight. But there are a lot of higher population areas in red Georgia as well. And you can see that's an example right there, I think, where Republicans are not displeased with what they're seeing. And you can see, as a matter of fact, just as we were going through, Walker, you know, we continue to get updates from throughout the state here. A lot of these Republican counties reporting in now. And again, it's happening faster than it did in November. I think the vote reporting is taking place in a more truncated schedule tonight than it did in November. But this is the pattern we saw in November. This is the pattern we saw where Raphael Warnock jumped out to the giant lead on the strength of those early vote reports from the big counties. Walker did take the lead. He had the lead for a significant amount of the time on election night in November. And what it ultimately came around to was the Election Day vote in the metro Atlanta area. This was some of the last votes to actually be reported out were from some of these counties here in metro Atlanta. So that's why, again, a minute ago when I flagged getting all the vote in from Rockdale County, that's why, you know, Democrats, I think their hopes really could be on metro Atlanta delivering for them. And what they see in Rockdale County, they want to see in the rest of these blue counties, because they're now going to have a bit of a gap here to make up. There are votes on paper for them to do it with. Rockdale suggests the path certainly exists, but Walker is doing what he did in November now. He's getting those numbers in from the Republican-friendly parts of the state, and he's building an advantage on the tally board.
As you say, it both looks too close to call, and it is technically now too close to call. Joining us now is Congresswoman Nikema Williams. Her district, her congressional district, includes most of Atlanta. She also chairs the Democratic Party of Georgia, which means this is a stressful night to be Congresswoman Nikema Williams. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Just a little bit stressful, Rachel, just a little bit.
This is looking like a squeaker. I mean, all the polls said heading into this that this was going to be very, very tight. Most of the polls showed incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock with a small lead, but in almost every case, it was within the margin of error of those polls. I mean, we know just mathematically this is going to be a tight race, but now we are seeing it unfold. What's your level of confidence here, and what's it based on?
Rachel, this is exactly what we knew was going to happen, because Georgia we're not blue, we're not red, we are periwinkle. So we are a true battleground state, and that's why we left it all on the field today to make sure that our voters turned out. That's why it was so important for us to stress early voting, staying in line once you got in line, because we are a true battleground state and every vote counts. We got our voters out, and now we have to continue to count the votes.
In terms of the Republican messaging tonight, we're hearing from them that they were surprised and pleased by the same-day voter turnout. They are sort of expecting that will map neatly into a partisan advantage for the Republicans, and that the Democratic vote would have been heavily towards early and absentee voting. Do you see things as that kind of neatly bifurcated, or was the Democratic Party also seeing good turnout today, same-day votes, among Democratic-leaning voters?
Rachel, I think when we look at this race that is still too close to call, and we see the district that I represent that I call the Fighting Fifth, which is, for everybody tuning in and doesn't understand the dynamics of Atlanta, that is Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton counties. When those numbers come in, you're going to see a huge bump for Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock, because the voters that I represent in the Fighting Fifth understand what was at stake today on the ballot. This election is about who was best poised to represent Georgians for 6 years in the U.S. Senate. And so I am sitting here waiting, just like we did in 2020. We know that these same counties gave President Biden the edge, first time in 28 years that we went blue for a presidential candidate. And I think we're going to pull it out again tonight as we continue to count every vote. We had to go up against huge hurdles, had to sue the state, the Republican Party, just to get Saturday voting already in a compressed time period. So voters stood in line and did what they needed to do, and now we just have to count the votes.
Congresswoman, it's Chris Hayes. I'm curious, given the compressed time scale here, only 4 weeks down from 9, and also the fact that, you run a long campaign and then it's election day, then you got to do it again. How is the last 4 weeks different from the 4 weeks before the first election day? What is there a change in messaging? Is there a change in tactics? Does anything change, or is it more of the same?
I mean, we have to make sure that we were still talking to every voter, but we had an advantage in being the center of the political universe once again. So I had friends from the Congressional Black Caucus PAC down in Georgia helping us out. I talked to my colleague from Indiana, Representative Frank Mervan, had volunteers from his field team in Georgia helping us out. So we had an advantage this time, having people coming into Georgia as we continue to lead the country and as being the center of the political universe. I don't want to be in the situation many more times, but we're going to take advantage of every opportunity that we can to make sure that Georgians have someone who is fit to lead us in the U.S. Senate. And that's why we did everything that we could today and left it all on the field for Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock.
Don't let anybody tell you any different, Congresswoman Williams. Adrenaline is good for you, even when it is an overdose of adrenaline week after week after week, election after election. I'm convinced it's good for you. And it's going to be a long night, but we'll be here to the end with you. Thank you, Congresswoman. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Rachel.
Congresswoman Nikema Williams, I should mention, if I did not before, she chairs the Democratic Party of Georgia, as well as holding that crucial seat in Georgia. There is a difference between understanding the math and feeling the momentum. And I do feel like, even though the math said this was going to be a tie race and this is going to be tight, it did feel like Warnock had a lot of momentum heading in here. Knowing that it is at least looking like a squeaker at this point does feel like the Democrats are back-footed a little bit.
Well, how could you feel any momentum in a campaign that wasn't happening? The Herschel Walker campaign shut down and for days. And so, the huge crowds at the Walker events? No.
There were no Walker events. They
it
weren't
didn't
doing it.
happen.
But I will remind everyone that in 2017, in the state of Alabama, I just looked it up, the candidate on the Republican side was Judge Roy Moore, the guy who had been credibly accused of being a pedophile. He got 48.3%, and Doug Jones, who's a literal civil rights hero, got 50. It's always every state is purple. It's big blue cities, and it's a bunch of rural voters with a lot of white voters without college degrees. And you add up the big blue cities, and you add up all those rural states. Every state is like this, essentially.
And I think the other thing that your question gets to, which I think is the one of the key narratives is this race, is you could go out and find 100 Republicans in Georgia tomorrow of every background, men, women, black, white, who would be more plausible, better candidates for Senate than Herschel Walker, or would seem to be better senators than Herschel Walker. There is no reason for Herschel Walker to be the Republican nominee from the state of Georgia to represent that state in the U.S. Senate, other than the fact that he is a buddy of Donald Trump's and was on Celebrity Apprentice. Yeah. That is the sum total of the qualifications.
But I think the Republicans would argue, but we're all covering a nail biter.
But that's their point. The point is that
this is to Joy's point. It's so tribal now that there is a large swath that'll just vote for the R.
Doesn't matter.
And I think the other thing to remember is Joe Biden had a lot of momentum too, and he did win, but it was a squeaker. I mean, they recounted. Raffensperger, and they recounted the votes 3 times, and Trump still tried to steal it. I mean, Trump didn't try to steal states that were landslides. He tried to steal the close ones, and this was close.
Everyone votes jerseys. At this point, racially polarized voting and partisan voting is so entrenched that they could have nominated a lump of soggy mashed potatoes as the Republican, the devil. It doesn't matter. If it's a Republican, one thing about Republican voters, they're disciplined. If you put somebody and you put R after there, It could be Judge Roy Moore, and they don't care.
But Herschel Walker is more than just a candidate who is not good at acting out being a candidate. He is also a very, very, very famous football star.
That's true, too.
And so, yes, he's wearing the red jersey here, but he is also somebody who brings incredible name recognition into this, even as a man who lives in Texas and who sometimes says the wrong words, or always says the wrong words, and is credibly accused of all of these terrible things. I mean, name recognition and celebrity matters, too. And so, I mean, that's what the Republican case was for him.
He's
right?
also running 8 points behind Brian Kemp. I mean, let's not forget, it's like both of these things are true. These
might still be enough to get him there.
These are the twin pillars of American politics at this moment, which is that structurally, negative polarization rules everything. Every party starts with 45%, the structural factors of what the state is, rural versus urban. And then, at the margin, this tiny little sliver of margin, there's 30,000, 40,000 voters who say, I can't do it for Herschel Walker, and that decides to say, or say, I'm going to do it for Herschel Walker because I want to see.
I want divided government.
And so that's it. They determine.
And they did make it harder to vote. I mean, they did pass the first vote. It was a law that was so bad, baseball left Georgia. And they did pass a voter suppression law.
That's right. The Georgia Senate runoff race between incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and his Republican challenger Herschel Walker at this hour, too close to call. About 56,000 votes between them, 68% of the vote in. We'll get the latest numbers from Steve Kornacki right after this. The lead has flipped again. When we went to commercial, the lead in this race appeared to be held by Republican challenger Herschel Walker. While we were in the commercial break, the lead has flipped so that Senator Raphael Warnock appears to be in the lead by just under 24,000 votes. That must mean that something new came in. As you see there up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, 73% of the vote, 73% of the vote is now in Georgia in this race that is too close to call. Steve, what came in that flipped the lead here?
So we were talking about DeKalb County, and DeKalb County released its early vote. And this is, at least in November, DeKalb County produced the biggest Democratic plurality of any county in Georgia. This actually contains a bit of Atlanta. DeKalb does. It's enormous. It's inside the perimeter. And you can see in the early vote here, Raphael Warnock north of 90%. This is how DeKalb ended up looking in November. Again, just a massive, massive Democratic margin. That's what this county represents politically. So this is a number Democrats would expect to get out of the early vote in DeKalb. We think there may still be some more early vote, some more mail ballots to report out of here, but this is likely the bulk of it. And then what you would get after that is the same-day vote. And the same-day vote in DeKalb County will not be as Democratic as this, but it will be Democratic. So, again, you just sort of, keep the number in your head if you can here in DeKalb County. Warnock, his high water mark is probably going to be 91.6 in DeKalb. He finished at 84.3 in November. He wants the number to be higher than. I think, 85% or higher coming out of DeKalb would be good news for Warnock's campaign when all is said and done. But he got a big chunk of the vote out of DeKalb County. We also got another big batch of votes in from Cobb County. And I think what we now are looking at in Cobb is basically the early vote is now all in. And Walker, again, this is one of those sort of set the number in your head here. Warnock's running at 65.5% with the early vote. This will be his high water mark. This is where he ended up in November. If he's north of that, he's in good shape when all is said and done coming out of Cobb County. So, again, for Democrats, we've been talking about it. These are their core counties. These are the biggest counties in the state. And these are counties where the election day vote is the big missing piece outside of what I showed you there in Rockdale County. So that's what's put. And we'll just check in again there. That's what's put Warnock back ahead in the statewide count. And again, a lot of opportunity for him in these other, as the election day vote comes in the core Atlanta metro area. A couple others we can show you where significant Republican counties where most of the vote is now in. In fact, now all of the vote is in Carroll County. Carroll County is actually one of the biggest Republican vote-producing counties in the state. Again, this is one of the changes we've seen in Georgia over the last 10, 20 years. It used to be some of these blue counties right here. I was just showing you Cobb County a minute ago. Through 2012, Cobb County was a red county. You know, Cobb County would actually produce Republican majorities, significant Republican majorities. It would be on any list of top Republican vote-producing counties in the state. It's a blue county now. Gwinnett used to be a Republican county. Henry used to be a Republican county. Now the Republican strength is no longer in that core Atlanta metro area, and it's shifted to this kind of ring of counties. They've grown in population, a lot of them have, on kind of the periphery of the Atlanta metro area, Carroll being one of them. Carroll's now one of the 10 top Republican vote-producing counties in the state. We've got all the vote. Walker lands at 69.7. Well, he was at 68.6 in November, so he's up 1.1 from November, but Warnock is up 1.4 from where he finished in November. So again, this is one of those where it's essentially a wash, and you look at it, you look at that gap. Here's how Walker's doing in the Senate race. Here's how Kemp did in the governor's race. You know, and I think this is one of those counties where if you're the Walker campaign, you wanted to be finishing better than this tonight. We've also got, here's another one, Floyd. This is not quite as big, but this is a big Republican county in northwest Georgia. Now, here, Walker, we think all the votes are in. Walker is up. He's up almost 2 points from November, but Warnock is also up nearly a point from November. So Walker gets some mild improvement out of Floyd County. Probably wanted a little bit more than that. But these are the big counties. You could just go through them here. Bartow County, you could take a look at Cherokee. We've talked so much about Forsyth County. Hall County is one here. This is probably good news for Walker. He's already ahead of his November level, and it's only Election Day vote, we think, left to come in Hall County. So an opportunity for Walker perhaps to build on that, but he needs to be running in a lot of these counties at least at and probably a few points ahead of how he did in November, because, again, you can see what Democrats are potentially sitting on there in the Atlanta metro counties. And one other biggie that I think we are now all in when it comes to the vote in is Dougherty County. And we said this county has the largest share of black voters of any county in the state, 70%. This is where Albany, Georgia is. And you can see, again, Warnock actually goes up here, goes up 1.4 points from how he finished in November. Walker actually down up 0.4 from where he finished in November. So again, for Democrats, this is one of those where, at least in terms of the margin here, this is good news for them. I think in terms of the turnout level, not quite as much as maybe as they were hoping for, but that's ultimately a good sign for them to get that kind of margin out of Dougherty County. So I just wanted to get that one in there. Largest black share of the vote anywhere in the state, and that's now all in. So again, you take a look statewide, and let me just, I'm going to ask my producer because we see that. We got more Cherokee. That's what just happened. Another big batch came in from Cherokee County. Remember, I think the last time, now we're up to 80% of the vote in Cherokee County. Again, biggest single Republican county in the state. Walker now running at 68.8. So now this is significant. Walker is running more than a point better than he did in the November general election. At the same time, Warnock is running 2 points better than he did in this county in the November general election. So Walker continues to make progress. He's got to make more progress with the 20% of the vote still to come in Cherokee County. The last time we checked, if you just look at the election day vote, that's what's being counted right now in Cherokee, the election day vote. If you looked at just the election day vote in this county, Walker was getting 76% of it. So again, if he continues at that clip with 20% still to come, there's an opportunity for him to build the number. He's, again, north of 70, I think at least, is what he's got to get here out of Cherokee. There's where Kemp finished in November. He doesn't have to get to that Kemp level, but he's got to get higher than he is right now. Because, again, where he is right now, his number's an improvement from November, but Warnock's number's also an improvement from November. And, in fact, it's more of an improvement than November. So Walker is going to have to pick that number up even more. And you can see Warnock now
50.0 to 50.0.
has technically moved in the lead. But, yeah, we are looking at a 1,612 vote difference between the two candidates here statewide. So they're kind of trading jabs right now. But I think you see the basic dynamics. There's a lot of Democratic votes to come in from here. There still are a lot of Republican votes in particular to come from just outside that core Atlanta metro area. And I think if you're it's just flipped again. We just got, what was it? What county was that? I'm asking my producer here. Okay, so yeah, we just got a small Republican county coming in, and again, it flips the lead there statewide for Walker. But the big picture here is election day vote in the Atlanta metro area, an opportunity for Warnock to really build on what he's got in terms of leads in these counties. And Walker, I think, really is probably going to have to step it up a little bit in these big Republican counties just outside the Atlanta metro area. He's getting good numbers, but I think he needs great numbers out of those counties tonight. He's not getting the great numbers so far. Again, the highlight of tonight, if you're Walker's campaign, is what you're seeing in rural Georgia, what we've shown you in some of those counties in South Georgia, some of the counties up in North Georgia, too, have been very good. The rural Republican counties, I think, have been very good for Herschel Walker tonight, but he's going to need it in these more suburban, ex-urban counties here where he lagged Brian Kemp the most. He's going to need in the remaining Election Day vote something really big to offset, I think, what's coming for the Democrats here out of Metro Atlanta. I don't know why I just clicked out of the state, but we'll click back in with a 50-50 race and technically Walker ahead by about 2,000 votes right now.
Steve, let me just ask you about the two counties on your map that appear to be grayed out where it looks like we've got no results. Is there anything to say about those counties?
No, small counties, and, sometimes it just takes some time. The smaller counties, too, will often they will wait and report everything out all at once. I would say one thing that does remind me of those, speaking of time, is DeKalb County. We said we're waiting on the Election Day vote. They were in November one of the slowest counties to report out their Election Day vote. They basically reported it out in a 3-hour period between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. So I'm just checking here in terms of where we are in the vote count statewide. We're running about 50 minutes ahead of the pace we were at in November. So maybe it'll go a little bit quicker here in DeKalb, too. But it was 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. was their timeline for the Election Day vote last time. Maybe it'll be, more like 9 to 12 this time, something like that, just given what we're seeing statewide. The vote is coming in faster statewide than it did in November.
And we did get that AJC reporting from earlier in the evening, Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporting that in Fulton County, which is Atlanta, the largest population center in the state, they're expecting all the early and absentee vote to be counted by the top of this hour, and then everything in that county to be counted by midnight.
Yeah, and I think we're looking at most of the early and most of the mail now out of Fulton County, and then it just becomes, again, that same-day vote out of Fulton. And like I said, the same-day vote, too, out of Cobb County. Cobb County, of all these counties, actually, in November, the county that had the last substantial report on election night in November was actually Cobb County. But I'm looking at the pattern of their returns tonight, and it looks like they've changed it a little bit. They may end up being a little bit quicker tonight.
All right, we'll keep a close eye on that as these numbers come in again. Look at that, 50.1 to 49.9. We said it was too close to call. We don't mean to prove it this emphatically, but there you have it. I mean, it's a squeaker. It's going to be fascinating to see. Alex Wagner, our colleague, joins us here. Alex, we knew, if you believed the polls heading into this, that it was going to be tight. But it really does look like this is a tied race at this point.
Yeah. When it says 50% and 50%, always a good indicator. I think, Rachel, as we look at Steve Kornacki and the big board and look at these counties, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the message or the lesson that Georgia shows us about the rest of the country. Because what's happening is Georgia's changing. What we're seeing here in Metro Atlanta and these counties that are coming in so overwhelmingly Democratic is a changing state, which is becoming dramatically less white. The big urban centers, Metro Savannah, Metro Atlanta, these are populations that are now much less homogeneous. People who identify as mixed race, Asians, Hispanics. This is the new Georgia. And there is a reason that you have both Marjorie Taylor Greene and Raphael Warnock representing that state. Because this is a country that's changing, and in some pockets is very resistant to that change, very angry about that change, and in other sides is very embracing of that change, very excited to have representation for the first time. I mean, keep in mind, in the history of the Senate, 2,000 people have served the upper chamber. 11 of them have been black. Right? So let's not lose sight of the fact that, A, you have 2 black men running for the Senate seat, but B, when you look at Georgia, when you look at these counties, this is a state that is changing like the country is changing. And the fact that it's split right down the middle is indicative of an America that is at an inflection point demographically. And that demographic change has brought a host of political angst and conflict and despair in a lot of ways. And Georgia is the expression of that, I think.
No, I'm so glad that you said that, because the reality is that one of our 2 political parties has built itself for that future. I mean, you heard Jason Johnson earlier tonight talk about it. the Democratic Party, which is the Georgia Democratic Party, is one of the better run Democratic parties in the country. They were running ads, including on YouTube, in Korean. They were running in-language ads for Asian Americans. Vietnamese. Yeah, they were running them in Spanish, in Cambodian. They understand that their base is the cities that are much more diverse and the suburbs that are much more diverse, and they've built themselves for that kind of a future. The Republican Party has essentially become a white interests party. And so they're doing the Sean Trendy strategy. They're still doing it. Is where can we find more non-college white voters? We'll just keep dredging them up, and we'll find things that will excite them, and they're all cultural. They're all critical race theory, and it's all book banning, and they're trying to find ways to dredge up more white voters without college degrees because they're even losing college-educated white voters. And young white voters under 30, this is new. They're going Democratic. They're going the same direction as the rest of that young demographic that is multiracial. So they've got the Republican Party at some point. This strategy worked with Trump because Trump's a celebrity. For now, it can work. It can work.
It might work tonight in Georgia.
I think it's unlikely, but it could. You never know.
It's a tie.
Right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the reality is you can't get better than that with this strategy for long because the country's only going to keep going in the same direction.
I think the white population in Georgia is the lowest percentage of the state since it was in 1890.
Yeah.
We know what was happening with white people and people of color in the 1890s, right?
Yeah.
We are in a different America.
Yeah.
And the tension and the division you see, I think, is really an expression of that change.
And I think that's why it's so violent. I think that's why, and I think maybe the whole thing about candidate quality didn't matter in the context of this real fight over civilization, right? The other side, the Republican side, is fighting for what it's trying to hang on to, and that is an emotional gut appeal to the dark angels. But the other, the Democratic Party and the broader coalition that was assembled in 2000 and 2022 really does represent reality. And so I think that's why it feels so violent. It is this sort of reaching backward.
It is existential.
Right. I think it's also, worth noting, and I don't mean to sound like too much of a partisan in this specific way, but I think it's also worth appreciating that Atlanta is the cultural capital of America right now. That Atlanta is the hippest, coolest, best-looking, most forward-leaning.
Thanks, Tyler Perry.
Atlanta is the cultural leader of the United States in a lot of different parts of the arts right now, and in a lot of the creative economy. And to have that energy, to have that flowing into Atlanta, to have Atlanta be such a functional city, and for it to have that national leadership role. We had Nikema Williams here, who's the congresswoman from that district, but from an Atlanta district, but also the chair of the Democratic Party. And you see that swagger. You know what I mean? Like, you see that confidence.
You made that point.
You see national Democratic leaders, particularly black women leaders, coming out of Georgia, specifically coming out of Atlanta, who are leading the country in every other way. And that is because that city is sort of the pulsing, throbbing heart of the country in terms of culture and ideas.
Yeah.
And I just think that has an important part to play in terms of how creative and forward-leaning the Democratic Party is.
And I'm going to say this as somebody from Brooklyn, so it hurts me to say it.
Oh, no,
a lot of people would argue that Atlanta is also the capital of Black America. A lot of people would say that. They're going to argue it. Now, Brooklyn is going to fight it. And we have hip-hop on our side.
I would love to hip-hop in Atlanta, too, though.
But Atlanta is, in a sense, the capital of
Goody
Black
Mob Outcast. I'm going to play my Ari Melber role.
Listen, somebody's got to play this role, and if you want to step into
Joining us to talk about the nitty-gritty of the hip-hop war between Brooklyn and Atlanta is somebody who knows a great deal about it. Missouri Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill. Claire, this is obviously exactly what we wanted you here for tonight. Just go on and just tell us. You can start in the 80s if you want in terms of the hip-hop, the way it is.
Yeah, I skip the hip-hop. And I can do Motown, but I don't think I can do hip hop.
It's all right. We love you, Claire. We wanted to talk to you because you are among us, the one who has been in squeaker Senate races and who knows how this feels on nights that are so fraught when it is legit tied.
Right. I've been talking to the folks in the back room, so to speak, all day about what they're seeing and what is going on. And I think everybody needs to remember, we've talked a lot tonight about persuasion, about how Raphael Warnock has done a great job on persuasion. But we haven't talked a lot about the difference between the two parties on getting out the vote. And midterms, and especially runoffs, are all about getting out the vote. And let me tell you two tales. The first is the Democratic Party. For everyone out there who sent in $5 or $10, let me tell you where your money went. $32 million has been spent on the GOTV effort in Georgia. They've knocked on over 4 million doors in the last 10 days to 2 weeks. Today alone, they had 6,000 people out knocking on doors, making sure they were pulling people out to go vote. Now, let's look on the Republican side. We have a party that tells you you can't vote early. We have a party that tells you you can't vote by mail. We have a party that tells you you can't trust voting, that elections are rigged and fraudulent. And by the way, you can only vote in person. It was raining for part of the day today. So the Republican Party has really shot themselves in the foot by really discouraging people to fully participate in a way that is easiest for them in this election. And yes, it's a squeaker, but I got off the phone less than an hour ago, and people in the back room say they're still very much on track and feel very good about where this will end up for Senator Warnock.
So the Democratic side is still expressing confidence within the past hour. They think that this is going the way that Warnock expected it to go.
Correct. The numbers they need to hit, and trust me when I tell you this, they know every county and every number they need in every county. So as these counties come in, they are checking them off, and there is no panic on the Democratic side. Yes, this is not going to be a runaway election, but I would argue with Chris Hayes, I think, who said earlier this was a swing state. This is not a swing state. This is a red state. This is not a state that has elected a lot of Democrats in the last 2 decades statewide. So I would say that this is a red state, and Reverend Raphael Warnock is doing very, very well against, obviously, a candidate who had problems and not just character.
Senator Claire McCaskill, thank you very, very much. We await your white paper on the whole hip-hop war between Brooklyn and Atlanta. We're going to send...
I'll work on that.
We are. We're going to send Ari over. He's going to take dictation. It's going to be great. Thank you, Claire.
Perfect.
While we've been talking to Claire McCaskill, we've also been watching the overall vote total for the state of Georgia tick up, 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 up. We have just hit 80% of vote in across the state. It is too close to call. Technically, we have been watching the lead flip back and forth within a percentage point between these two candidates. Steve, what's coming in and what's outstanding?
So what just happened is DeKalb County, which we're making famous tonight if it wasn't already famous, the rest of the early vote in DeKalb County has come in. So now it's 2/3 of all the vote in DeKalb County is in. Now you're basically looking at the same-day vote from DeKalb to come. So again, this is the most Democratic-friendly vote you're going to get out of the most Democratic-friendly county in Georgia. And so again, 90.8 for Warnock. What did he get in the November general? He got 84.3. So again, we will see now with the remaining third of the vote, which will mostly be same-day vote, we'll see how much Walker is able to get close to that 14, how much Warnock falls from that 90.8. But again, this is, one of those core places Democrats are counting on. We're waiting on same-day vote from DeKalb County. We're waiting on same-day vote from Fulton County. We're starting now to get in some of the same-day vote from Cobb County. And I think I would note it's interesting that while Warnock leads the overall count here in Cobb County, 62-38, and while he is running ahead of where he finished in this county in November, he got 56.8 in November. He's 5 points north of that right now. So far, the Election Day vote, and that's what they're counting out right now in Cobb County, so far the Election Day vote is favoring Herschel Walker 54-46% in Cobb County with what's been counted so far. So there is an opportunity here for Walker to improve. There is an opportunity here for Walker to bring that Warnock number down. Again, he's going to need to. He doesn't want Walker running any better than Walker already did in the Atlanta metro area in November. But those are major sources of outstanding same-day vote. Gwinnett County is a major source of outstanding same-day vote. Again, a lot of these counties right here in the immediate Atlanta metro area, we are waiting on same-day vote. And then again, as we say, it's same-day vote, too, in those the next layer of counties all around kind of the immediate Atlanta metro area. They're Republican counties, and we're waiting on same-day in a lot of those, too. Again, a place like Cherokee County, can Walker get above 70%? A place like Forsyth County, Walker's going to have to do better. He got 64.8 in November. He's probably going to want 67, 68% out of there this time. He's got, with the remaining vote, it's same-day vote. Can he get up there? That's the question. But Democrats, again, huge opportunity here in the immediate Atlanta metro area. And for Walker, it's going to take numbers better than he's getting so far out of those those big Republican counties right outside of Atlanta.
All right, we will keep a close eye as these numbers still continue to come in, both statewide and as the amalgamation county by county. It is a real nail-biter in Georgia tonight. The Senate election there, as we say, too close to call, and boy, is it. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. We're going live to Georgia right now. We're at Raphael Warnock's headquarters. Is Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. Jason, I have to tell you, we're glad that you're there because we'd be embarrassed if you were here. Things are devolving completely. On set, we have no discipline. We have no camera awareness. It is a complete mess. We're going to start swearing any minute. So we're actually going to hand things over to you to just host from Warnock headquarters for a while.
So the energy here has changed immensely. For about 20 minutes, it looked like Herschel Walker was in the lead, and they were playing a lot of gospel music. And then when Warnock took the lead again, it went to T.I. and Jay-Z. So that's how the mood has changed. It looks like a lot of the people, and again, I've heard from people in the campaign, they're feeling really confident. They're waiting for the two big counties to really come in, because at the end of the day, it's not the small counties that Warnock has to win in, it's the big ones, and he seems to be overperforming what he did in November. So everybody here seems really enthusiastic, and now the beats really dropped, so folks are going to start partying.
Can I ask you, this is rude of me to ask, and I'm not supposed to, but how are people getting their information? Do they have us on, or CNN on, or our local news on? Well, how are people receiving the information in the room that they're reacting to?
So there's a big CNN screen here. Most people are on their phones, and then you have some campaign staffers, believe it or not, kind of going throughout the room and answering people's questions. That's what's been kind of interesting to me. I'm texting folks in the campaign, but it's almost like they've got people in the room calming everybody down and keeping everybody happy. Everybody who's been getting on stage has been given updates as well.
All right. It's been interesting. I mean, from our perspective here at HQ at MSNBC, this is, I mean, the race, the lead is flipping back and forth like every single time that you look at it. Every single time something new comes in, there's a new story about what's happening, but it does feel like an absolute squeaker. You are right at the heart of it, Jason. We'll be back with you.
Awesome.
All right, let's go to Steve, who is absorbing new information. Steve.
Yeah, we've got some more significant completed counties now. 3 of them are Democratic counties. And so let's start here where Macon is. This is Bibb County. All the vote is now in. And you can see, again, this is a core Democratic county. But the key question for Warnock is, how does this number compare to November? So, again, take a look here. Warnock actually up 1.4 points from how he ran in this county. Bibb County, where Macon is in November, Walker's number is flat, actually down 0.1 of a point. That's a positive sign for Democrats. Go over to the Alabama border, Muskogee. Take a look here. Warnock ran at 62.2% here. This is where Columbus is. He gets 64.5% tonight, so he goes up. Walker's number actually decreases a bit. I know this is right on the margins, but we're talking about an election on the margins here. Warnock, remember, overall finished a point ahead of Walker statewide. So any county that looks like this for the Warnock campaign standpoint is an encouraging sign. He's increased his share of the vote relative to November, while Walker has seen his share fall relative to November. Also, we've got all the vote in now in Richmond County. Again, core Democratic county. This is where Augusta is. You see Warnock's up almost 2 points, 1.8 from where he finished in November. The Walker number down about 0.5 point. So these 3 counties here kind of spanning across mid-Georgia here, all encouraging news there for the Warnock campaign to see those numbers. Now, take a look up here. Again, we keep talking about this sort of outer Atlanta suburbs, exurbs. Take a look at all the vote now in Barrow County. Again, this is a bigger, one of the bigger, not the biggest, but one of the bigger Republican counties you're going to see in Georgia. And here Walker does see improvement in terms of 68.8 is what Walker got in November. He improves it by almost 2 points tonight. Keep in mind, though, Warnock's number is also up a point relative to November. So Walker really only with a net gain here of a point when it comes to the margin. And again, when you're talking about these counties, you're talking about that dynamic we saw that doomed Walker in November, at least in terms of getting an outright win in November and finishing second. He ran so far behind Brian Kemp in these core Republican counties. This is where Walker was in November. This is where Kemp was. Walker in a county like this tonight probably wants to be getting closer to Kemp. He got to 70.7. He probably wanted to be at 71, 72. So we're seeing all the vote come in there. You know, we have almost all the vote in from Paulding County. Again, similar type here of county here in that sort of outer ring, suburb, exurbs of Atlanta here. Again, Walker winning it. What's the number compared to November? It is up, but the Warnock number's up too. In fact, the Warnock number is up more than the Walker number is up. That's not a good sign for the Walker campaign. And again, you compare that to how Brian Kemp did here. Brian Kemp was sitting close to 66%. Walker is going to land tonight, it looks like, maybe under 62%. So we're still waiting on Cherokee. We've keyed this one up all night. We're at 80% right there. We're still waiting on Forsyth, where 62% of the vote is in. But what Walker needs are big numbers, and I think bigger numbers than he's been getting out of these counties here, because these are the biggest places where there's Republican vote left in the state right now. And again, overall right now, you see Warnock with that lead of 11,000 statewide. And stress, we are sitting on a lot of votes here in this Atlanta metro area. And those votes that they're still there in the Atlanta metro area are probably Democratic-friendly votes. A lot of them Election Day votes in Fulton County, Election Day votes in DeKalb County, Election Day votes in Gwinnett County. In Cobb County, the Election Day votes seem to be slightly Republican. There are a lot there as well. But there's a lot of opportunity here for Warnock in that core sort of Atlanta metro area. So again, I didn't mean to click out of it, but again, 11,000 votes is the advantage for Warnock right now. And I really do think, we've been talking about it all night, Walker is just, as the same day comes in these Republican counties, he's got to get bigger numbers.
Steve, we're going to go to Von Hilliard at Herschel Walker headquarters in just a second, but can I just ask you a dumb, math question before we move on? There's a few of these counties where you've described the performance tonight as compared to the performance in November as both candidates doing better.
Yes.
Right? So is that just the libertarian vote being split between these two candidates?
Yeah, actually, and as an example, you could see in very small print at the bottom of the screen here, that was the libertarian candidate, Oliver, in November, got 2.1% of the vote statewide. So theoretically, there's room, in any given county. We'll take Cherokee as an example here. Oliver actually, and this is one of the things that we saw, in a lot of these big Republican counties with a lot of college-educated voters, Oliver actually did better than he did in a lot of the rural counties in the rest of the state. And I think that reflected the reluctance of a certain type of Republican voter in a place like Cherokee County. They turned out, they voted for Kemp. They didn't want to vote Democratic in the Senate election, so they used the libertarian option in this election. That's why Oliver got 3.2% here. But in a county like this, it opens the door for Walker to gain 1.2 points tonight relative to November, and for Warnock right now to be gaining 2 points relative to November, because there's 3.2 that was sitting there on the libertarian line. So that's the thing for Walker. In a lot of these counties, it's not enough to hit the number and to improve by a point or two. He's got to be improving by 3, 4, 5 points, I think, in these counties. So that's why I've been saying 70% maybe as a benchmark in Cherokee County. And frankly, the way things are going in some of these other parts of the state, maybe more than that is what he would need to get out of here. And we've just been seeing rural Georgia, in these counties, and we showed you a bunch of them in South Georgia earlier, and some up in North Georgia as well, counties with large concentrations of non-college white voters, which has become just a huge part of the Republican coalition in Georgia, in the South, nationally. I think you're seeing strong Republican turnout and very good numbers for Herschel Walker, even relative to November. But when you start to get to these Republican-friendly counties where you have higher concentrations of college graduates, he's not so far making the kinds of leaps and bounds gains I think he needed to see or needs to see, again, relative to November. We showed you Barrow County. It's another one here. Core Republican, fair number of college degrees here. Oliver got 3.1%. It means Walker moves up. It means Warnock moves up, too. I think Walker probably wants to be moving up more than that in a county like this. And again, let's just reset statewide and see. Wow. So a few have come in since we've been talking, and it's sitting at 201 votes statewide right now, 83% in.
It sounds like, if I'm reading between the lines, though, Steve, it sounds like if you had to choose right now between whether you'd rather be Warnock or Walker, you'd probably rather be Warnock.
As Walker takes the lead in the
As Walker takes the lead. But given what's outstanding, maybe that's how it's looking, but at this point, it may be down to the very, very, very end of the night.
I think the key right now is there's an expectation that when you take a look at Fulton County, which how many times have we clicked on Fulton County in the last hour and a half and we've seen 55% in? I think there's an expectation of what the election day vote is going to look like in Fulton County, but we haven't seen it yet. So you don't actually know until you see it. You take a look at DeKalb County, and again, this one produced a bigger Democratic plurality than Fulton County, even though it's smaller in population. So in both of these counties, there's an expectation here that the election day vote, while it won't be as good for Warnock as the early vote and the mail vote was, it'll still be pretty darn good for him, and it'll give him a pretty massive plurality. For that matter, that he can get some more out of a place like Gwinnett County as well. There's enough sitting there potentially to offset what Walker, now he has the Walker number climbs up to 8,100. The Walker number is a diffuse number. It's coming in from all sorts of different counties, as they finalize their tally throughout the state. The Warnock number is going to be much more, the strength is much more concentrated in a handful of these big blue counties. Like we said, there are 159 counties in Georgia, and in the November general election, Warnock carried fewer than 30 of them. And yet, he had more votes statewide than Herschel Walker did. So for the Warnock campaign, this is very reminiscent of what we were watching in Georgia on election night in November, where, again, you saw Warnock jump out to that big lead early. Walker had the lead. I was looking at my notes a few minutes ago. I mean, Walker had the lead in the tally for more than 2 hours on election night. And it was not until the late in the night, very end of the night, when you got the final election day votes and the final batch of mail ballots from Cobb County, that's when Warnock moved ahead of Walker and ended up finishing 37,000 votes ahead of him. And again, you look at what's outstanding in Fulton, DeKalb, and some of those other places, and there's ample opportunity for Warnock to do the same here. It's just a question of when does that vote get reported out? It seems to take a while. That's been the pattern in Georgia. Those counties tend to take a while relative to the others to report their vote out. And does it look like we expect it to look like, or is there a surprise? Is it somehow not as Democratic friendly? Are there not as many same-day votes as we're expecting? Those are the sorts of things to look for, because we just haven't seen enough of it right now to really characterize it. We can characterize it based on our expectations and based on history, but you want to see some reality, you want to see some tonight, and you're just not getting that from those big counties yet.
That's right. Nothing counts about the votes except the votes themselves. And that's what we're waiting on. Steve Kornacki, thank you. Let's go now, as promised, to Herschel Walker's campaign headquarters in Georgia, where MSNBC's Vaughn Hilliard is standing by. Vaughn, you were talking to us earlier about the sort of cautious, tentative optimism on Walker's side. Has that been changing over this last couple of hours as this lead has been flipping back and forth between the two candidates?
Right, and every single time that Walker takes the lead here, the crowd here cheers. But there's a reality at play when you're looking at these rural counties that Steve and you guys are outlining right now. I am going back and forth with a Walker ally who is on the ground here, who is a part of this effort, and there's some acknowledgments that need to be made. Number one, acknowledging these very rural counties, quote, basically all bad for Herschel. Why? Because Warnock's total vote share isn't dropping off as much as Walker's is. And this is the line here. This from the Walker ally, quote, I think the path is very narrow at this point. The numbers for Walker are not coming in at the levels that the camp here said they needed to. They were looking to these rural counties to make up for the anticipated deficits in the greater metro Atlanta area. Democrats have shown, not only in the general election, but 2 years ago in the runoff, that they turn out. And now the question is what numbers do come in here from the likes of DeKalb and Fulton County. And to be fair, earlier today, we were actually stopping at polling locations in DeKalb and Fulton County, and each of us were commenting on the few voters that were coming in. There were some polling locations, 25, 30 voters every hour. I was talking to one poll worker who said it was just a trickle of folks that were coming in, but she compared it to last Friday in the early vote, at that very early voting location, which there was a 2.5-hour wait. So the number of voters, we're talking about thousands at some of these locations that only saw hundreds come out here today. To what extent was that suppressed turnout here today realized? It is not quite clear here. If I could also comment, when we were talking about what the Republicans' expectations were here today, there was a question about to what extent could Brian Kemp be the savior for this character that is Herschel Walker here. You know, you'll remember that back during the general election, the two campaigned separately from one another. Brian Kemp is sort of this odd American political figure right now, somebody who certified the election in 2020, much to the ire of Donald Trump. But then in his primary back in May, he beat the Trump-backed challenger by more than 50 percentage points. And then fast forward here to last November, he beat Stacey Abrams by 8 percentage points. That is when he decided to jump in and try to help Herschel Walker win over those 81,000 libertarian voters, and also those more than 200,000 voters who voted for him for governor, but not for Herschel Walker, the Republican for U.S. Senate. So as we're looking at these numbers here, frankly, the Republicans are not optimistic about what they are seeing here, as they're telling me right now. At the same time, they are acknowledging that the hope is that the Fulton County and DeKalb County numbers are suppressed Democratic same-day voter turnout. The question here is, to what extent is that the case? That is what everybody here at Walker headquarters is waiting on now.
Fascinating reporting, Vaughn. Really helpful for us understanding the lay of the land here. Thank you. Vaughn Hilliard reporting live from Herschel Walker's campaign headquarters. To underscore what Vaughn just said, he characterized the Walker camp as not optimistic, one Walker ally describing the path as very narrow, essentially characterizing the overall feeling inside Walker's operation right now as one in which they believe they are missing their numbers. They are not coming in. The numbers are not coming in at the level that they know they need. Now, that's one thing to have that impression. It's another thing to have the actual numbers, which is what Steve's got.
And in two more places where that is exactly, Rachel, what just played out. We got the final votes in two more significant counties here, and I think this is really becoming a theme tonight. Houston County, this is where Warner Robins is, the 11th largest city in Georgia. And again, you're talking about a Republican-friendly county with a fairly high concentration of college degrees relative to the rest of the state. And you take a look here, Walker wins it, but his number is actually short of where he finished in November. Warnock's, meanwhile, jumps up by 2 points. So this is actually a great result for Democrats, even though Walker gets more votes out of here. This is actually exactly what Democrats are hoping to get tonight. And again, it's that pattern of these Republican counties, these non-rural Republican counties. That's where you saw Walker struggle in counties like this relative to Brian Kemp in November, and you are not seeing him make big jumps forward tonight. We said at the start of the night that was what he was going to need. We also have another one of those counties sort of on the fringes of the Atlanta metro area, exurbs, getting a bit away from it here, but Hall County is now all in as well here. And again, this is a big Republican county. Herschel Walker finishes tonight 2 points ahead of where he finished in November. But remember, in November, the Libertarian got 3% here. That other 1% goes Warnock's way. So this is a very small net gain for Walker. Walker's hoping for and needs much bigger gains than this, given the strength that Warnock is showing elsewhere in the state. And again, what does that add up to right now? Walker is leading right now, but again, it continues to be that. He's leading the tally right now. Continues to be those giant sort of core of Democratic votes that just haven't been counted yet, that we strongly suspect are right there in Metro Atlanta.
Steve, one of the very basic things about these results that you were explaining moments ago is that effectively, you know, it's humans that vote, not acreage. And so the votes that are likely to come in that are going to be most helpful to Raphael Warnock are going to be from what appears geographically to be a concentrated area, but is where most of the humans are in the state. In terms of outstanding vote, now that we're at 85% of the vote in all over the state, can you just give us a general characterization of where the largest number of votes are still outstanding? Are they, in fact, scattered from lots of rural counties, or are they concentrated in some of the more populous areas?
There is a scattering in the rural areas, but what you've got here is the two biggest places are DeKalb County. You've got a third of the vote still to come in DeKalb County, and you can see already there's almost 175,000 votes that have been counted here, and there's still a third to come. And then there's Fulton County, where you can see over 200,000 votes have been counted, and that's probably just over half of the vote in Fulton County. And again, it's Election Day vote in both of those counties. There's still a substantial same-day vote. We've got about 2/3 of the vote in Cobb County is what we've got counted right now. Right now what we're seeing is that Walker is actually leading in the Election Day vote in Cobb County. So there's an opportunity with what remains in Cobb County for Walker to cut into that Warnock lead. But again, Warnock right now is doing 5 points better in Cobb than he did in November. So if you're Walker, you don't just want to cut into the lead that Warnock has right now. You want to bring Warnock all the way down, under 56.8%. And again, we say Walker is leading in the same-day vote right now in Cobb County. He's getting at 54% of it the last time I checked. So he needs to do better than that if he wants to bring the Warnock number down to a place that he was hoping to see it. Those are the biggest outstanding sources of votes. But there are still at 20% in Cherokee County. That's a lot of votes. Forsyth County. Now we've moved up in terms of we've got 3/4 of the vote in Forsyth County. Again, this is the second biggest Republican vote producing county in the state. Again, you've got a large number of voters with college degrees here. So, and again, you had a gap in November between how Walker did and how Brian Kemp did. And now you see with 3/4 of the vote in, Walker is doing a little bit better. He's now doing 0.2 of a point better than he did in November. But again, remember that Libertarian got 3% in November. And look at that. Warnock so far has moved up nearly 3 points in Forsyth County from his November total. So what had actually been a 32.5-point margin for Walker over Warnock in November is actually right now reduced. It's only 30 points right now. And again, Kemp won this county by 46.
I apologize. I need to interrupt you. We've had a change in the characterization of the race. At this hour in the U.S. Senate race in Georgia, this is a race that is still too close to call, but it is the view of the decision desk that it is too close to call, but incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock leads in this race. So the decision desk has decided to characterize this race as having a clear leader, and that being the Democrat, Raphael Warnock, but still the overall characterization is too close to call. Back to you, Steve.
And the reason why that just happened, Rachel, is what we were saying was it was one thing to expect or to think that the Democrats were going to fare very well with the Election Day vote in this core Atlanta area. It's another thing to see it. We're now starting to see it. We just, in those last 2 minutes, remember we were sitting there at 55% in Fulton County. Now 67% of the vote is in. Now you are getting big numbers of Election Day vote. And you're seeing, again, this is how Fulton looked in November. Warnock won it big. Obviously, this is a huge Democratic county. This is a place where there was some lag. Brian Kemp did substantially better than Herschel Walker did. And you're seeing now as the same-day vote comes in, real strength, continuing strength for Raphael Warnock. So the name of the game tonight for Herschel Walker was to keep Warnock's numbers in this Atlanta metro area from getting any bigger than they were in November. He does not look on course to do that with anything that we've seen so far in the Atlanta metro area. The second thing that Walker needed to do tonight after that was to improve significantly in the Republican counties outside of the immediate Atlanta metro area. We have been showing you how he's not been doing that. And the third thing he needed to do tonight was to get really high rural turnout and to even do better in these rural areas than he had done in November. There are plenty of places on this map where he's done that tonight. But those first two, I think right now, you're really starting to get a picture. And you see Walker now taking that lead statewide. You're just seeing a picture of Walker not succeeding in those first two missions. And when you're talking about this Atlanta metro area and then you're expanding it to include those red counties outside of it, you're talking about a massive share of the state.
Blowout elections are easy to parse. Elections this close, where it's 87% in and still too close to call, even with a lead now characterized by the decision desk, those require professional assistance. That's why we've got Steve Kornacki, and that's why our colleague Ari Melber is standing by with our team of experienced political insiders. Ari.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. Shout out to Atlanta. And let me bring in our insiders, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Simone Sanders-Townsend, host of Simone on MSNBC, and Michael Steele, former RNC chair. Welcome to all of you. We're picking up on that characterization. We also were listening to Joy, Rachel, Alex talk about Atlanta and the soul of Atlanta. Was it not Outcast and Goody Mob?
And you got a shout out there.
Well,
you needed your expertise at the table.
I'm going to send it back as a shout out to Atlanta because Outcast and Goody Mob said you have to get out, get up, and do something. And that's true in culture and voting, which connects to what we're seeing, which is, according to Steve, an underperformance by Walker and an overperformance from the last round by Warnock. Your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been texting with a bunch of Democrats in Georgia, and what they've been telling me is this is kind of the roller coaster that they expected, and that we also saw back in 2021 with the runoff, which is they banked a huge early vote. That's a big part of the Democratic strategy, was back then, was this year, and also in the runoff. They knew that as numbers were coming in, as Steve has been providing us numbers, the rural counties were where they needed to really watch. Did Walker get closer to Kemp in a lot of these counties? Did he make up any of that 200,000 gap of the number of people who voted for Kemp that didn't vote for Warnock? And it doesn't seem like so far he's met that bar. But what they're all waiting for is Metro Atlanta. Metro Atlanta is where the votes are. All counties are not created equal. That's another way of saying people in geography, and that is certainly true here. Some of these counties, Warnock could win 150, 200,000 of a vote share, which could put him over the edge. We'll see. We're still waiting for more numbers.
I think the growth in Metro Atlanta is something that is really worth unpacking, right? So we always talk about black voters in Georgia and the coalition that is needed and the strength and the growth of black voters, but there's 1.1 million Latino voters as well. They're the third largest racial group in Georgia right now, 1.1 million, and they're concentrated in the Atlanta metro area. I had the opportunity to speak to former Ambassador Andrew Young, who was the first black person elected in Georgia since Reconstruction in 1972 and went on to serve as mayor of Atlanta. And he noted that when he was mayor of Atlanta, they had about 1 million people. Atlanta has now grown to 7 million people, the Atlanta metro area. That is huge. That makes a difference. It is a diverse electorate. This electorate is a sophisticated electorate. But to be very clear, Reverend Warnock could not get trounced in the rural counties and be the next senator, the re-elected senator from Georgia. And so I think this coalition is a coalition that it looks kind of like an Obama coalition to me. This is different than the Biden coalition, right? Reverend Warnock, he's a black man from Savannah, Georgia. Okay, so his coalition will definitely look slightly different. And I think what we are seeing is he ran up some of his numbers in the rural counties, and that's what you got to do. He campaigned in those areas as well. He campaigned in the area where Herschel Walker is from. And I think he is reaping those benefits, and also the fact that Herschel Walker was a bad candidate that does not and did not represent black people.
Well, that idea takes us to, Michael, your reaction to the numbers, but also whether some of these Republicans are turning out not for Walker, but despite Walker.
I think that's very true. I think when you're looking at these numbers, and Simone really put her finger on, I think an important overlooked point tonight, when you step back and look at it, what Senator Warnock has been able to do is he's not only held serve, he's improved the game for himself in these rural parts of Georgia. So while Herschel has picked up, maybe he's gone up a point or two from November, Warnock went up a half a point or 3/4 of a point, in some cases a point, which says a lot about the dynamics of the voters on the ground, meaning that those Republicans in those blood red districts or counties looked at Herschel Walker and they liked Warnock better by 0.5% or 0.75%. Statewide, it makes a huge difference when the margins are this close. So it wasn't just enough for Herschel to do well and sort of keeping Warnock's number down in Metro Atlanta. He had to really outperform in his base vote, and he hasn't.
I want to give it back to Rachel. We got 3 insiders, a lot of good perspective here. My thanks to Jen, Simone, and Michael Steele. Rachel, back to you.
Thank you very much, Ari. We're going to take a quick break. Right now, it is too close to call. NBC's decision desk considers this race to be too close to call, with Senator Raphael Warnock in the lead. We've got 87% of the vote in. We've got no call in terms of who's going to win this race. Lots to come. Stay with us. O'clock on the East Coast. Polls have been. Take this wide shot. Will you see how we are bursting? There is about to be some sort of break in protocol because we are bursting.
You know, the nuns in my elementary school had the wisdom to be very careful about who I was allowed to sit beside.
You enjoy our bad influence.
You're about to be separated.
We have completely devolved all professional
It's gone.
visage.
I don't think we can get it back either.
No,
because of these two.
We're the bad kids in class. I have to admit it.
There is a lot to say, and some of which can be said on television, it turns out.
Exactly.
But we work on television.
Oh, is that
so we're going to try to get it together, people.
Is that what happens?
people?
Yeah. Get the nuns in.
Okay. All right. It is 10 o'clock on the East Coast. The polls have been closed in the great state of Georgia for 3 hours. The Georgia U.S. Senate race is too close to call. NBC's decision desk characterizes this race as one in which Democratic incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock is in the lead. But you can see how tight it is. 88% of the vote is in statewide. That number has ticked up significantly since we just went to that quick commercial break. Steve, what came in while we were away?
We just got a big batch of same-day votes, election day votes from Gwinnett County. This is, again, one of the biggest in the state. There's almost 1 million people here, one of the fastest-growing counties in the state, and it's become a core Democratic county. And I think what's significant about what we just got in out of Gwinnett County is that Warnock led the last batch of election day votes that just came in by a fairly significant margin over Walker. So with 90% in, you see that Warnock finished in this county with 58.9. He's running at 62.4. The opportunity, well, again, for Walker tonight in a place like Gwinnett County, it was make sure Warnock doesn't get any higher than he did in November and try to roll his number back a little bit. And instead, you could see Walker's down a point here right now. Warnock is up 3.5 points relative to November. And again, I think significantly in that last batch of election day votes that just came in Gwinnett County, they favored Warnock over Walker. So Warnock still winning the vote overall. He didn't get 62%. But a significant margin. We also just got more election day vote from Cobb County. And again, here now we're up to 85% of the vote in. Now, Walker has been leading in the election day vote in Cobb County by about an 8-point margin. So as a result, if you've been following, the last time we looked at Cobb, Warnock was sitting at about 62%. His number's now fallen under 60, but he finished at 56.8. Back in November. So again, with 85% of the vote in, Warnock right now is running 3 points better in Cobb than he did in November. Walker is still trying to get to his November number. Again, he is leading that election day vote, so I would expect with the remaining vote here, Walker to tick up a bit, Warnock to come down a tad, but Warnock on pace here, I think, in Cobb County to get exactly what he was looking to get out of it tonight. Take a look at Douglas County. We got all the vote in Douglas County. Again, Atlanta metro area, how did it look in November? Warnock 64.8. How does it look tonight? Warnock, basically 2 points better than he did in November. How about Walker? He improved by 1/10 of a point. This is exactly what Democrats want to see in this Atlanta metro area. They're doing very well with that same-day vote in Gwinnett. They're on pace in Cobb. They exceeded their number in Douglas. We showed you Rockdale earlier. Again, all of the things, all of those counties I just mentioned, Walker had a goal tonight. He has not met that goal in any of those counties. A couple others we can show you. Look right south of Atlanta, Fayette County. Oh, how about this one? Walker, all the vote is in. Walker wins this tonight by 491 votes.
Wow.
This county, in the 2004, we talk about the Atlanta metro area, outside of Clayton and Fulton and DeKalb, which have been Democratic counties for a long time, the rest of these counties that are blue right now used to be red counties. This county stays red tonight by 491 votes. In 2004, it voted for George W. Bush by 43 points. So that's the kind of transformation you've seen in this Atlanta metro area. And I think critically for Democrats tonight, this is an improvement again from November. Warnock bumps up by 2.3 points. Walker by only 0.2 of a point. So the Democrats improve. They nearly pick off Fayette County tonight. They nearly take another one of these Atlanta Met. They've been picking one or two off every election, it seems, the last couple decades. They almost add Fayette tonight. They come within 491 votes. But again, not at all what Walker wanted to see out of that county tonight. All the vote is in Paulding County. We were showing you this one earlier. Walker moves up by 0.8 of a point. Warnock moves up by more than that. Again, there was more improvement here for Warnock than for Walker. This is a core Republican county. We talked about Walker needing to move up 4 or 5 points in places like this. All of the vote is in right now. I should say all the vote is now in Walton County. Take a look at this one, another core Republican county. Walker's up a little, Warnock's up a little. It's a wash. I mean, the story, we're still waiting on some votes here, but the story is just consistently the same. The biggest Republican counties in the state, the biggest Republican vote-producing counties in the state, are the places generally where Walker lagged behind Brian Kemp, the Republican governor, the most in November. And he just has not moved the number up the way he needed to in basically any of those counties. He's still not getting anywhere near the level Kemp got. He didn't need to get to the Kemp level. He needed to get closer. And meanwhile, again, the Democrats in those counties that were already strong for them, they've actually gotten stronger so far tonight. And that last batch of same day of Election Day vote we just saw out of Gwinnett County was good news for Democrats, too, because Warnock's on pace to continue adding votes. You see, since we came on, the lead comes down statewide for Warnock. That's because that Cobb Election Day vote that I was telling you about that favors Walker got added in, so it makes it closer statewide. But again, still sitting here waiting on a lot of same-day vote out of DeKalb, still sitting here waiting on a ton out of Fulton, and I believe we just got, now here we go, we just got basically the rest of the vote from Cherokee County, the one we have been talking up all night as a critical barometer, the #1 Republican vote-producing county in the state of Georgia. Herschel Walker's going to finish at 69.1% there, it looks like. Again, that's an improvement for him from the November general election. From the 67.6 he got in November to the 69.1 tonight, he moved up 1.5 points in Cherokee County. But Walker moved up from 29.2 to 30.9. Warnock, excuse me, moved up from 29.2 to 30.9. He improves by 1.7 points. So this actually, Walker got a bigger number than he got in November, but his margin is actually less tonight than it was in November. And again, this is a county, look at how Brian Kemp did in the governor's race. He won it by 50 points. And tonight, Walker's going to come out of here not even with a 40-point victory out of this state. So 38.2%. That's the margin for Walker. It was almost 50 for Brian Kemp. So not at all what Herschel Walker needed out of this county tonight. And again, that probably leaves, I should say, that leaves Forsyth County as the second biggest Republican county where we have significant outstanding vote. But I'll show you, but the story's no different. You know, again, Warnock's moved up more since November than Walker. These are just all places where Walker needed to have significant gains. And I say significant, I say 4 or 5 points, you know, better than he did in November. And we're just not seeing him do it anywhere. And we're seeing Democrats get the numbers they wanted to out of the Atlanta metro area. And I think what we're just sort of waiting on right now to see is some more of that same-day vote. I think particularly we've not seen any of the same-day batches come in from DeKalb. I think everybody in the world expects the same day, the election day vote in DeKalb, to break heavily for Warnock in a way that I think would make this math look even more promising for him. But we haven't seen a report from DeKalb yet, so I think there may be some waiting on that. And again, maybe a little bit more from Fulton. But the numbers from Fulton, the numbers we just saw from Gwinnett County, those are numbers Democrats want to be seeing.
65 and 70% in from DeKalb and Fulton is promising at this point for Democrats, for sure. Steve, thank you. Interrupt us as more stuff comes in that's going to change our understanding of these dynamics. Let's go back now to Greg Bluestein. He's politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He's been live for us tonight at the Warnock campaign headquarters. Greg, it has been a seesaw here as we've seen this lead flip back and forth. We did just get about 15 or 20 minutes of consistent reports from Steve Kornacki, basically describing all of the results is sort of pointing in a Warnock-friendly direction. So it certainly feels right now that NBC characterizing Warnock as being in the lead, and those latest results feel positive for Warnock. How does it feel there at HQ?
Well, look, it's a full-on party mode right here at HQ. There's a dance scene behind me. And look, Steve's been spot on all night, not surprisingly, about this seesaw. It looked like Democrats would have an early lead. It looked like Republicans would cut into their margins, and it looked like Democrats would retain that lead right now. There's still tens of thousands of votes in Metro Atlanta to be counted. And that's why I'm getting texts from Republicans right now saying, stick a fork in it, this thing is over.
Republicans are telling you that.
Republicans are telling that senior Republicans are saying it's all over, but the counting, it's over. I'm hearing reports from strategists allied with Herschel Walker's campaign saying, you know, that there's very little path to victory right now for him. We still have to wait till those Metro Atlanta counties come in, but it's not looking good for Herschel Walker right now at all.
Greg, we don't want to get ahead of the actual results, as I mentioned, and I will reiterate, NBC characterizes this race right now as too close to call with Reverend Warnock, Senator Reverend Warnock in the lead, but that's as far as we can go in terms of projecting any sort of result here. Given that, though, and given what you're just describing, I wanted to just ask you substantively, one of the things that we saw, particularly after the general election, for this runoff in particular, was Senator Warnock's campaign appealing openly to Republicans and appealing openly to swing voters and people who don't ally themselves traditionally with the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates. Is it possible for us to tell from your reporting, from what you're seeing in the results, from what the campaigns are seeing, whether or not that part of the strategy from Warnock might have been the difference maker here?
Yeah, it's a unique strategy because usually runoffs, we see it as a turnout operation. We see candidates go for the base. But in this case, Senator Warnock had the resources and the message to go after not just the liberal base, but also those split-ticket swing voters, moderates, independents, who in big numbers did not back Herschel Walker. We've talked about this, but Governor Kemp had 200,000 more votes than Herschel Walker in the November midterm. And this was an area where Democrats thought they could continue to appeal to those voters and get them back to the polls, even without other races on the ballot.
Right. So even in counties where they're not going to end up winning, the Democratic candidate is not going to end up winning, shaving down those margins, keeping those margins low, even in places where the Republican won. We're seeing the effect of that tonight in these totals. Greg Bluestein, politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, MSNBC political contributor. We'll be back with you, Greg. Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's striking that Von Hilliard's sources aligned with Herschel Walker and Greg Bluestein's sources in the Republican Party are so forthright. And that speaks to the lack of support that Herschel Walker had among Republicans.
What do you mean?
Because you're less truthy when you're all in. But when the guy is Trump's, handpicked guy who doesn't even live in the state, the Republican operatives who can read a poll and know where every last Republican vote in the state is, and they know they are not in the counties that are outstanding, they'll tell reporters like Von Hilliard and Greg Bluestein the truth.
Yeah.
So I think you can take their reporting, not just because of the caliber of journalists that they are, but because of the quality of the sources that are going to tell the truth about Herschel Walker's past.
And Democrats have been consistent all night. The text vibe has been this way all night. Democrats have been confident all night. And because the thing is, what Democrats and what you understand as having worked in campaigns is Democrats vote early and they report late. And so if you're getting toward the end of the night and what's left are places like DeKalb County and Fulton County, Democrats feel really good if it looks like a tie because they're like, oh, those late voters are us. Because Democrats, the way that voter suppression has worked is it's pushed Democrats to really early vote, to really lean into souls to the polls and vote early, to lean into absentee, which was really destroyed by this law. Absentee was crushed by it. And then to also show up on Election Day. I talked to a lot of voters in Atlanta who said, they were deliberately waiting to vote on Election Day. That was their goal, was to vote on Election Day. So Democrats get all three bites at the apple. Republicans only get the one.
That's what happens when you tell people to just vote.
That's correct.
And don't say that early voting is somehow
bad. That early voting also
corrupted.
counts. Democrats get all three.
You know what? The other thing that Vaughn was talking about that I think bears discussing is the fact that, Walker's strategy at the beginning of this race was not to go after, Warnock's strategy was not to go after Walker and his myriad scandals.
Yeah.
It was to talk about the work that he had done, focusing on state-level issues, and also to invoke his bipartisan record, specifically mentioning Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio on the campaign trail. With Ted Cruz, Warnock worked on a bipartisan infrastructure effort in terms of highways. With Marco Rubio, he worked on maternal health policy. Mm-hmm. These were people whose names, prominent Republicans, whose names he was invoking in a bid to do exactly what he ended up doing, which is eat in to Walker's share of moderate Georgia voters who find him unpalatable, and he being.
But he closed this campaign with a very direct attack challenge to Herschel Walker and everything Herschel Walker has represented as a candidate. There's room for one more note about the colossal stupidity of the Trump just vote on Election Day strategy. And that is that he's choosing it in a state that one of its earlier choices for voter suppression was to close the polls at 7 p.m., to leave them open only for 12 hours, 7 to 7. The state we're sitting in here right now, 15 hours. New York State, that opens at 6 a.m., closes at 9 p.m. So if you're Donald Trump and you say, I only want you to vote on Election Day, the next thing you say to your Republican legislatures is, oh, by the way, put 3 more hours on Election Day.
Or make it open 24 hours on Election Day. Right.
Give me 3 more hours at least on Election Day. But, he's just played into this thing so flawlessly, stupidly all the way on the vote only on election.
Here's my totally dumb question about this point, which I think you've all made admirably tonight. So the reason that Trump has demonized absentee voting and early voting is because he needs to do so in order to feed the backward-looking myth of why he lost in 2020. Now, the 2020 election will never be fought again. Nothing will ever happen there that will ever vindicate that strategy. We're not going to terminate the Constitution and reinstate him without it. It's just not going to happen. And so is there any way that the Republican Party can take that and turn it into something that might be electorally constructive for them? I mean, it has no value. It even
came in, had come in, Walker had been statewide. He'd been leading because the other major Republican vote-producing county, Forsyth County, you got Cherokee and Forsyth right next to each other. They are number 1 and number 2 in terms of producing Republican votes. We basically got all the vote in Cherokee County, and we've got almost all the vote now in Forsyth County. And you could see here, again, Walker winning it, but it was Warnock who actually improved more than Walker did from November. So this is, on paper, Walker wins the county, but this is a loss for him because he needed to do much better than this in Forsyth County. So this was the last biggest place left. I think Coweta County, there's
taking notes while you're talking. And sorry,
we just got a big update. This is a big batch from DeKalb County that just came in, as you can see. So now we're up to about 3/4 of the vote in DeKalb. And wow, okay, now we've got just about all the vote in from,
that's it.
Gwinnett County, nearly 1 million people live here. Warnock has improved by more than 3 points from November. What does this look like statewide? Well, I'll let you take it from there because I think there's some news there.
That check mark is a consequential thing. NBC News can now project that the winner of the Georgia U.S. Senate election tonight is incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. You saw the math happen effectively live on your screen there. We see a difference here of just 26,000 votes between these two gentlemen with 94% of the vote in. We had previously characterized Senator Warnock as being in the lead. NBC News, again, now projects that the winner of this U.S. Senate race is the incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. Now, we saw, as these results came in around the state, we saw Mr. Walker do marginally better, particularly in small, rural, lightly populated, heavily Republican counties. That was not enough to make up for the improvement in standing that we saw from Senator Warnock in heavily Democratic areas. In larger, more populated Republican-leaning counties, Senator Warnock, we saw him cut into the kind of lead that Mr. Walker might otherwise have had. But the final result is now known. The U.S. Senate seat in Georgia will be held by Raphael Warnock. Voters in Georgia, for the 4th time in 2 years, choose Raphael Warnock as their senator for this seat. When Republican Senator Johnny Isakson retired, Senator Warnock, now Senator Warnock, ran for his seat, made it to the runoff, ran in the runoff, got the seat. That earned him 2 years. Then he decided to run for re-election, got to the runoff. Tonight is the runoff, and he is re-elected to the United States Senate. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this is the first African-American man ever elected to a full term in the United States Senate from the great state of Georgia. Major moment.
Yeah. Wow.
That happened.
It shouldn't have had to happen. I think it is. We should note that it shouldn't have had to happen. I mean, the fact that he's had to run, 5 times in 2 years?
1 million times.
1 million times in 2 years is a result of Jim Crow. You know, it was a decision that was made in 1964. The guy's name is Denmark Groover. I went in a deep wormhole on him today, who was a United States senator from Georgia who decided that they needed to have these runoff elections in order to prevent black voters from being able to decide elections. And they saw their block voting as inherently voter fraud, and therefore they needed to give a second shot. So, you know, the reality is Raphael Warnock already won this seat. The fact that he had to win it twice is a result of Georgia still retaining some aspects of Jim Crow, which they doubled down on with this new voter law that produced long lines. It didn't have to happen. A shortened period in order to do this. Instead of 9 weeks, they only had 4 weeks. They cut off the last weekend. Voting ended on Friday of last week. They didn't get that second weekend. They killed souls to the polls right before the election. Republicans in the state of Georgia have done everything. And Brian Kemp, you know, he may look good because of what he did with Donald Trump and resisting him, but Brian Kemp is one of the authors of the modern-day Jim Crow residue that has created, because Republicans want to guarantee themselves these statewide elections. In this case, they were defied by a very multiracial coalition of voters who said no.
Signed that law behind closed doors in front of a picture of a plantation. If you needed any more visuals.
Correct.
This is a resounding victory for people of color, for black Georgians, for a changing country, for one of the most... I spent some time with Reverend Warnock on the trail the last time he ran. A phenomenally disciplined candidate. I was with him the day the Raffensperger phone call leaked. And that's the time you could really just go after Donald Trump. Yeah. Raphael Warnock did not choose to do that. He chose to talk about health care. He chose to talk about education. He is someone that has relentlessly focused on issues ranging from student loan debt to climate change, maternal mortality, really important issues in his tenure in the Senate, which of course has only been 2 years long.
We have a live shot here of Raphael Warnock's headquarters in Georgia, where, as they say, crowd goes wild. People reacting to the news that their candidate has been reelected to the U.S. Senate. You can just feel the energy through the screen.
The phones.
Right now, and everybody holding up their phones to capture the moment. You know, if somebody else next to you has their phone out, you probably don't need yours out. You can just get it from them later. I'm just saying, you could watch the event instead of just watching it through your screen. But that's cool. That's cool. I mean, for the Democrats, this has a practical impact.
Yeah.
Having 51 senators is better than having 50 senators, particularly when some of your senators are named Sinema and Manchin, and you are trying to get stuff done. This says a lot about what is going to happen in 2024, because this says a lot about what Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are going to be able to do in terms of policy. Joe Biden's going to be able to sign some laws. He's going to be able to sign some bills. They're going to be able to do stuff with legislation that they otherwise would not have been able to do with senators like those in the driver's seat and enjoying the spotlight as much as we saw.
Judges.
And confirmed judges. That's what I was about to say. I mean, you've got now as a key voting issue, this is another seismic shift. When you look at those counties that are seismic shifts between 04 and now, the issue of the Supreme Court as a political deadweight for Republicans is a seismic shift. And Joe Biden will be able to run on the federal judges he confirms in the next 2 years.
And he's going to be able to confirm them much faster now, because he's been working with the Judiciary Committee, which is composed of equal number of both parties. Now the Judiciary Committee is going to have a majority of one on the Democratic side. That means procedurally they will get those confirmations out much faster. They'll get to the floor faster. They'll get through the floor faster. Legislation is going to be a much bigger challenge because there's always the Republican House of Representatives. But what they can pass in the Senate has changed dramatically.
And should we? No, I mean, this is effectively the end of Mitch McConnell's obstructive career. He's just, you know, he was reelected a couple of years ago. I don't know how much longer he stays in the United States Senate, but effectively what he's been able to do to Joe Biden, what he did to President Obama, that ends now, at least for the next couple of years. He won't be able to do that anymore.
I want to tell you that we're going to try to do something that's going to fail here in just a moment. I'm going to try to go to Jason Johnson at Warnock headquarters, and I'm telling you that's going to fail, not because of any technical failure, but because there's no chance he's going to be able to hear me. So, Jason, just talk for a second. Just tell us, talk, say things. Go.
I think I can hear you.
Tell us about the room.
Couldn't hear for a second there. It's amazing. So the music is popping. All I do is win. Everybody on Warnock team is extremely excited. I got to tell you guys, the feeling here isn't just elation. The people here actually feel like they saved the country. And one of the insiders I was talking to said, look, Raphael Warnock now has a 6-year term in the Senate. They think Georgia will be solidly blue by the time he has to run again. They think Georgia is the next Virginia. So this isn't just a victory today, it's a victory for the next 6 years.
Wow. Jason, can you talk to us about the moment people realized that he won and the reaction in the room?
Yes, it was ridiculous. It was amazing. I got to tell you, I was there when Obama got elected. I literally had an older woman come up to me and say, I wasn't this excited, or I haven't been this excited since 2008. I have never seen this level of enjoyment. And like I said, Rachel, all throughout the night, I was surprised at how optimistic the Democrats were. But I feel like everybody in this room feels like they accomplished something. And I got to tell you, by comparison, when I was going throughout the community today, even when I talked to Republicans, many of them said they didn't want to vote for Herschel Walker. But every Democrat said they were thrilled to vote for Raphael Warnock a second, third, or fourth time if necessary to get him back in the Senate.
Jason Johnson, thank you so much. It's great to have you there. Great to have you having those conversations. I know you can't hear me, so I'll just say bye-bye. We're going to check. We'll try to get back to Greg Bluestein, who's in a different part of the room as well, to see if we can get back to them while they're doing that. Also, we should check in with Von Hilliard at the Walker campaign headquarters if we can. They obviously are receiving the same information, presumably with a much different mood. Von Hilliard at Herschel Walker headquarters in Georgia. Von.
We should note on the television screen here at Walker headquarters, they are playing Fox News, and they were a little delayed after us, but just in the last 2 minutes, Fox News has officially called it for Raphael Warnock. The room here was quiet, and they are now playing Journey's Don't Stop Believin', so make of that what you will. But this is a moment, a reality. I was just also talking with that Walker ally who I've been talking with, and the quote was, "I believe it's over." There is an acknowledgement that this was a campaign that was unable to make up that 38,000 vote deficit that 1 month ago they faced against Raphael Warnock here. They brought out the likes of Brian Kemp to try to help convince those libertarian voters, to try to convince those folks who either did not vote in the election at all or voted for the Democrat Raphael Warnock to change their votes. But what these results are showing us, that it wasn't enough. And if I may, after traveling around the country here through the course of 2022 to cover midterms from the likes of Arizona here to Georgia, you have seen yet again these Trump-backed candidates go down. While they won primaries here across the country from the likes of Kerry Lake in Arizona, Tudor Dixon in Michigan, Tim Michels in Wisconsin, Herschel Walker here in Georgia, time and again we have seen over the course of the last month these candidates go down in the general elections. It was a question of would, for a second time, so many of these independent voters, even conservative voters in these key states like Arizona and Georgia, be willing to vote for a Democrat yet again? And the American voter has clearly answered that tonight, is that yes, they are willing to vote not just one time for a Democrat, but they're willing to vote for a Democrat for a second or even a third time. And that is what was ultimately going to be handing Raphael Warnock yet a 6-year term here in the United States Senate.
Von, drawing that connective sort of tissue that you're describing between these different types of campaigns, these different types of candidates in different parts of the country, one of the things I therefore have to ask, because it is part of a pattern, is whether there's any question as to whether or not Mr. Walker will concede. He was asked explicitly on the campaign trail this week if he lost the race, whether he would concede the race, and he walked away from the people who were asking him that question without answering it. Do you have any expectation, do we have any reporting to indicate how he might himself personally handle this loss?
The direct answer to that is no, but there has been a questionable campaign apparatus here around Herschel Walker. We should note, there has been no even denial of a serious allegation that came out here in the last 5 days of a woman who came forward with her name and on the record alleging that Herschel Walker physically attacked her. There was no denial or no response ever given by the campaign. And if you just look at the amount of money that went towards Herschel Walker's candidacy, he was outspent by more than 2-to-1 margin by Warnock forces here. This is a question about Mitch McConnell, about Rick Scott, about the faith that was placed in this candidate who was initially endorsed by Donald Trump. I think that you have a Republican Party that is implicitly looking to move on from Donald Trump, but whether they'll ever explicitly get to that point, that is the question. But in terms of Herschel Walker coming out and defending him, you saw very few Republican senators come out, the likes of Tim Scott, John Kennedy, Lindsey Graham. There was not a cavalry, though, of Republican figures that came out to the state. Not even Donald Trump was willing to come back out here and put his name on Herschel Walker. So the former Heisman Trophy winner may be a lone man walking. This is a man who didn't take up residency here in Georgia until literally just about 14 months ago here. And so you're unlikely to see the likes of Georgian Republican figures. Brian Kemp wasn't even willing to campaign with him until after he handily won his November general election. So you should expect to see Herschel Walker, who was not involved in politics before this year, really to be left alone as Republicans look to try to posture towards not only 2024 Senate races, House races, but also try to come to terms with how they could even begin to win the White House, as Donald Trump is the only announced candidate on the Republican field right now.
Vaughn, one last question for you along those lines. Mr. Walker has lost tonight, but he got close. And at least with the numbers that we're looking at right now, with not every vote counted, but very close, he's within a point of Raphael Warnock. With a big investment in his campaign, with more strategic and financial support from Mitch McConnell, from Rick Scott, from the other sort of Republican powers that be, and these guys who control resources within the party, arguably he could have got there. Are there people close to the Walker campaign who are mad about that, who are angry that they didn't get the kind of support that might conceivably have put them in the winner's column tonight?
You know, I asked Brian Kemp this question when I sat down with an interview with him last week on Thursday. I said, does it frustrate you? And he said that he doesn't believe that money matters in races like this. And in large part, the American public here is keenly aware of these candidates here. And I think that that general election from a month ago is a testament to that. The state of Georgia, which is historically a conservative state, Brian Kemp pushed back on the idea that this is a purple state, despite the last 2 election cycles. He beat Stacey Abrams by 8 percentage points. And that is calling into question, you know, where the voting electorate, to how far are they willing to go here? And Herschel Walker tried to step away from Donald Trump in the last 5 weeks, but clearly there was a stain that came with the last year of his candidacy. You know, in terms of the actual amount of money that was spent on these candidates and on these campaigns, I think you go to the likes of even Arizona, where I spent the good last several months here, and you compare it to the likes of the Mark Kelly, right, in the U.S. Senate race, in Raphael Warnock. They were to build around, and I think the Biden administration allowed him to do this idea of Capitol Hill successes, right? The likes of Mark Kelly was able to hold up the CHIPS Act as a deal that he helped, was instrumental in. Joe Biden was in Arizona today to join him. You know, Raphael Warnock has talked about the millions of dollars that he was able to direct towards HBCUs. He was able to make the case here to, especially the Democratic voters here in the state of Georgia, that he helped press the Biden administration on student loan forgiveness. You know, he was able to make the case here over the course of the last 2 years that having a Senate majority and having that extra Democrat up on Capitol Hill was consequential. It was more than just simply representation for the state of Georgia, but it had real-world consequences. And that is what Republicans are also working up against, is the reality the Democrats can hold up the CHIPS Act. They can hold up the infrastructure package. They can hold up these significant achievements up on Capitol Hill to voters and make the case that Democrats are able to do something, unlike the Republican Party, which is still trying to figure out what its future looks like, with Donald Trump potentially looking to seek the helm of it again.
MSNBC's Vaughn Hilliard reporting live for us from Herschel Walker's campaign headquarters, where the crowd there has also just heard the news about Mr. Walker falling short tonight. Vaughn, thank you for your insight tonight. It's been great to have you with us. Much appreciated.
Thanks, guys.
Can I pick up on something that he just said?
Please.
I mean, one thing that we should all disavow ourselves of ever asking is, oh, will the Republicans get in a room tomorrow and decide the Herschel Walker strategy is a bad idea? The Doug Mastriano strategy sucks. Carrie Lake was a freak. Voters. No! This is who they are. They will not do that. And Vaughn said about 1,000 really important things. The other one is that Republicans now have totally different forces of gravity. The Supreme Court now pulls them down. It doesn't lift them up. They got all 6 seats, and voters hate the court. The idea of governing, Republicans have always mocked Democrats, or I'm going to go out there with my plan, it now proves that voters are pretty into governing. So all of the gravitational things that Republicans have counted on, the Supreme Court will help me, governing is boring, we can just go for the cultural issues. It's close, which means they won't change their strategies, but the political forces are pulling against everything that they've made a 20-year bet on.
Well, I mean, the thing is, Republicans made an affirmative choice because the demographics just are what they are. About 6 in 10 white Americans are Republicans. That's just the base. In the South, you know, racially polarized voting, it's much more lopsided than that. Any Republican starts off at about 50%, 49, 50% in any Southern state. That's just reality. And so Republicans have made a choice over the last generation that they are not going to do policy, that policy is boring, policy is wonky, it's nerdy, and that what they're going to do is focus on non-college educated white voters, demonize college education and collegiate education as being elite and effete and awful, and just focus on non-college educated white voters and focus on their emotions. Everything that Republicans put forward is about the emotions of non-college educated white voters and their fears, and making them more afraid of demographic change, more afraid of education, more afraid of people who live in cities, more afraid of the border and of immigrants, and just constantly stoking that. There is a short-term benefit to that, which you just saw tonight, which you can get enough rural voters and enough non-college educated white voters to come out and dutifully vote for whoever you put forward, no matter how flawed, no matter how many times they put a gun to the head of the woman they were married to. They don't care about that. They will come out dutifully. But the problem is, at some point, with a country that's becoming more racially diverse and more diverse in terms of religion, you're going to have to do what Michael Steele tried to do when he was chairman of the RNC. You've got to, at some point, try to appeal to non-white voters. You just have to, because the demographics are what they are. I ran into my cousin in Atlanta because he moved to Georgia from Queens. And a lot of people are moving around and moving south. And so these states like North Carolina and Georgia are just going to change more. So at some point, Republicans, yeah, it works for y'all for now. You're going to have to make a decision, and I'm sorry, but the black candidates you put up and the Muslim candidates can't be Dr. Oz.
Yeah.
At a certain point, people aren't going to go for that. You can't humiliate the people that you want to bring in. I'm sorry, but Herschel Walker was a humiliation to black people. The people I talked to in Atlanta and all over the country who have been all in my phone saying, please promise me that this man won't be a senator, because they felt absolutely kicked in the face and humiliated and had their noses rubbed in the dirt by the fact of his nomination.
Yeah.
Because he was so inadequate, so bad, so... What did Chappelle say? Demonstrably stupid?
Yeah.
That it made it look like you're mocking black people. That ain't a strategy.
The Atlantic today suggested that Herschel Walker's candidacy was an assault on black dignity.
It was.
And the reporting that we have out of Atlanta, I mean, I think the CNN polling from last week said that he was going to win 3% of the black vote. I mean, just a staggering rejection from the black community. And, you know, I will say, Joy, you'd think the Republican Party will have to ameliorate itself, but it increasingly feels like their strategy is, if we can't win, then let's change the rules.
We'll just suppress them.
Well, whether it's gerrymandering, whether it's the independent state legislature theory, whether it is voter suppression, change the game.
Yeah.
The Georgia voter has shown over the last few elections who they will vote for. They will vote for Democrats, and they will vote for Republicans who do not align themselves with Trump. Republicans who say no to Trump. That is who they will vote for statewide. They will not vote for Trumpy Republicans statewide, and they will not vote. I mean, this is a message about where the Republican Party is. It does not mean that Georgia right now is an all-blue state. There's plenty of Republicans in Georgia, including lots of people who cast votes for Herschel Walker tonight. But that idea that the Republican Party has made a strategic error in aligning itself with somebody who Republican voters in Georgia will not go with, that's a lesson that it sort of doesn't matter whether or not they learn. The voters are going to keep teaching that lesson whether or not Republicans ever learn it.
Yeah. Well, Steve, at the board tonight, every time he said, you know, this county voted overwhelmingly for George W. Bush, you know, it's now voting Democratic. I was just looking at it thinking, okay, well, when Senator Warnock runs again 6 years from now, How many of those counties will Steve be pointing to saying, this was red the last time Senator Warnock won? So, you know, normally when you win a Senate seat by 1 point, people think of you as vulnerable next time. Not here. The likelihood is next time, Raphael Warnock, you know, you probably will call it for him a little earlier, you know, at 9:30 instead of 10:30, something like that, and he'll win with 52, 53, something like that. That a stable re-election number for an incumbent who's doing a good job. That's very likely for John Ossoff 4 years from now in Georgia because of that movement that Steve was identifying on that board.
Unless what Alex just said happens, which is that unless they deal with the demographic changes and the sorts of rigid appeals that the two parties have aligned themselves into, unless the Republicans decide to deal with that by restricting voting to the extent that electoral preferences among the voters don't matter. Because you can gerrymander a legislature, you cannot gerrymander a Senate seat. You can restrict voting in such a way that makes it so that the voters' preferences aren't felt. And to have the former president saying, let's terminate the Constitution and just install me as leader, right? It's shocking, and he always speaks in terms that blunt so as to shock us all and to dislocate the news cycle. But it's of a piece, right, with this idea that election results should be seen as suspect, that Republican candidates, there's, you know, if you had to guess in the abstract, you could guess that, you know, a lot of them wouldn't concede when they lose. The idea of problematizing elections themselves, problematizing democracy itself, is not just a Trump problem, it is increasingly a problem on the right, and it is because of these dynamics.
Brian Kemp fundamentally believes that you should restrict drop boxes, you shouldn't be able to serve people water at the polls. Brian Kemp and Donald Trump are only different by degree. He's not embarrassing. But is Brian Kemp some sort of champion of democracy? No. Brian Kemp is a champion vote suppressor. He did it when he was Secretary of State, you know, engineered that state for himself to become governor, and then they re-engineered it again to make it as hard as possible for anyone who prefers Democrats to vote. College students had a hell of a time. Some 60,000 voters had their votes challenged in this election. They made it as hard as possible, and they still lost. They won't learn a lesson from it because Brian Kemp agrees with Donald Trump on the fundamental thing. Those people should not be allowed to vote because they don't vote for me.
And Georgia has a history of doing this.
Yes.
Right? The reason we have runoffs, to your point, it's a confection of the civil rights era, trying to thwart black candidacies. The reason you have 167 counties in Georgia is to give more power to rural voters.
Yes.
I mean, this is what the state does. So the idea that they would react to this loss, Republicans in charge, by trying to change the rules of the game, I mean, they've done it before.
They already changed. I mean, I think the other thing that Democrats will have to decide as a strategy, because they do still do that, sit around and do strategic things, is whether voting rights is the next fight, and whether sort of having the steel in the spine to abandon the filibuster and actually do something. 486 states have, or 48 states have contemplated 486 voter suppression laws, and a hell of a lot of them have passed.
But they're never going to get anything through a Republican-controlled House. I mean, even if it is essentially an even House, that's just not going to go anywhere. I mean, the question is whether or not they'll be able to do it at the state level, essentially, and whether or not federal judicial nominees will make a difference.
Well, could they? I mean, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed the House. How long is that thing live, right? I mean, once they have, that is, I guess, a question for our experts.
We get a new Congress.
Right, when they get a new Congress.
It expires on New Year's Eve.
Well, there you go.
Everything that, you know, that this Congress passes dies as soon as the Congress adjourns.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because
while we're having this conversation about Georgia, though, you know who we ought to bring into this conversation is somebody in Georgia who is a politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Greg Bluestein is at Raphael Warnock headquarters, where things look, if anything, livelier than they were about 10 minutes ago when we were back there with Jason. Greg, how are things in the room? And let me just get your reaction to this result tonight.
Well, look, Senator Warnock and his strategists feel like this is a vindication of his strategy, which was not only to energize the liberal base, but also to claim the political center. You know, he talked about bipartisanship. He talked about working across party lines. He didn't go for, you know, sort of red meat that might have energized more Democratic voters because he felt like he already had locked up the base. At the same time, Herschel Walker ran a Trump-centric strategy. He talked about culture wars. He talked about gender pronouns. He talked about transgender sports, issues that weren't on the top of mind of so many voters. And he allowed Senator Warnock to not just get the Democratic core, but also those middle-of-the-road voters.
Greg, if you weren't on TV right now, my office would be calling you to find out whether or not Senator Warnock is expected to be giving a victory speech anytime soon. So pretend we're not on TV and let me know if you know the answer to that question.
I think he is. I think we're going to hear in a couple minutes that he might be taking the stage fairly soon. I also think we might hear news out of Herschel Walker's campaign. I know that I was asked to deliver a phone number kind of between intermediaries, so we might hear something from Herschel Walker's camp soon too, as well.
You were asked to deliver a phone number for one of the candidates to the other candidate?
Exactly.
Is it your belief that Mr. Walker will concede that he has lost this race? He would not answer questions about that as recently as this week.
Yeah, I've asked his aides and strategists about that. They think he will. This was earlier tonight. They thought he would kind of go gracefully. But as you said earlier, he said in public forums that he'd acknowledge the outcome of the results. But we're just not sure of the timetable. But I do know that I was asked to give a phone number of a key Warnock strategist to Herschel Walker's camp.
Greg Bluestein, very important information. Thank you for that. We'll be back with you, and of course, we'll be taking Senator Warnock's victory speech as it unfolds, and we will be hearing from Senator Walker, presumably, or Mr. Walker as well, if he does in fact make a concession speech that is public-facing at all this evening. I want to turn it over now to my colleague Chris Hayes, who's with our team of political insiders. Chris.
Rachel, thank you very much. I'm here with former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Simone Sanders Townsend, host of Simone on MSNBC, and former RNC Chair Michael Steele. As campaign veterans and professionals, got to be feeling quite good inside that Warnock right now. What's your big takeaway from this victory tonight, Jen?
One, I mean, we've spent so much time talking about Herschel Walker and the disaster of the vampire versus werewolf campaign. Warnock ran a very good campaign. He campaigned across the state. He had a positive and affirmative message. I would not be surprised, and I've already heard rumblings of this from Democrats, if people start talking about Warnock as kind of the next, right? The next type of person who should run for higher office. It's not what he's thinking about tonight, I don't think, but this is the kind of victory where it really will introduce you to a broader pool of the public.
Yeah, I mean, what's so striking to me about Warnock, he's now won. This is a guy who never ran for office before. And in fact, when that recruiting class happened in the run-up to 2018, Chuck Schumer tried to get Stacey Abrams to run for that Senate seat, and she was like, I want to run for governor. Warnock was seen as a kind of like, okay, this is what we'll do. He didn't make a lot of headlines around that race. This man has now won 4 races in 2 years in a R+3 terrain, basically, and in a year that was a tough year in Georgia for Democrats. I mean, he's got some very serious high-level political talent.
He does, but I think we just need to bring it down. All right, I get
take us to reality.
Yeah, I get the euphoria of the moment, but let's bring it down and keep it real. One, it's Georgia. It's Georgia with Herschel Walker as his opponent. A different Republican, you have a different election, I think. You may not even have a runoff after the November election.
Totally think that's
the first
possible.
time.
Yep.
So I think we need to understand the playground we're on here. There are important lessons for both parties, I think, in the takeaway from tonight. Beginning with the Democrats, you've now opened a door. How do you move into this space to begin to move this very red state still? Look at the map. Yeah. All right? Look at the map. The fact that you saw Warnock perform better in those red outlying district counties, that's a good sign for them. That means there are Republicans there you can reach. Think about that. For the GOP, stop doing stupid. Stop putting up candidates that you know damn well can't even articulate a campaign, let alone run one.
And here's the thing about Walker, Simone. You've got some races in this midterm, Mastriano, for instance, where it was really a Trump thing. Like the local party, other folks were not really behind Mastriano in Pennsylvania, but he had the Trump endorsement. Herschel Walker was not that. Herschel Walker was Trump's idea, but this was Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott and Lindsey Graham, and everyone got on board to clear that field to get behind Herschel Walker. So many people own, not just Donald Trump, many people. There are many fathers of this defeat, to invert the old saying.
They all did interviews.
I mean,
and you won't hear that going forward.
Joy has been saying it, and I'm just going to echo what the great Joy Reid has been saying. Republicans in Georgia thought that black people were just going to vote for a black candidate.
That's right.
And we have to be real and talk about it's just not representation. We want substantive representation. Raphael Warnock, I think, is substantive representation for black voters in Georgia. And that is why they and others went out and voted for him, a coalition. It was painful for many people across the country, and myself included, as a black woman who worked in Democratic politics for a very long time, to see Herschel Walker sitting in interviews with handlers who are sitting members of the United States Senate, white sitting members of the United States Senate, because they felt as though that he could not handle it. That sends a message. People were paying attention to that. I also, though, want to take a point and shout out the organizers. And before we walked in here, Nikema Williams, the congresswoman from the Fighting Fifth, that she just told you all on the panel, she called. She's the chair of the Georgia Democratic Party. She said, I told you all my district was going to show up. And she said that this sends a message to all the people who are kind of thumbing their nose at Georgia being included in the DNC primaries top 5. She told me to tell the people that they are coming for it all.
No state has made a better case for itself earlier in the primary calendar for the Democratic Party than the state of Georgia.
This is also not the beginning of them for the Georgia Democratic Party. This is like a long several years running. Back in 18, they flipped Georgia 6, right? Back in 2019, they won more seats. They've won 40 municipal seats. They flipped those over the last couple of years. It's 28 years since a Democrat won statewide in Georgia, and they did that in 2020. So look, they've been doing this over several years, and it is not fully red, I would say. It's maroon, it's purple, I'm not sure.
It's pink.
But they've been doing the work there, and you see that in the organizing and how they've been able to turn out people in some of these redder counties.
Let me just come back to the thing Simone said, because, you know, it's hard. The Walker candidacy was so manifestly preposterous. It just was. There was no reason for this individual to be a United States senator. He was a high school football star and a native son of the state of Georgia who had moved out and had been in Donald Trump's Celebrity Apprentice, right? It wasn't like it was the Republicans were testing the boundaries of extremism in terms of like how far can we push it? Is what this whole thing, like they were running an experiment.
That requires intelligence.
Right, yeah, sure, right. No one engineered that.
No one engineered it. No one thought about it. Donald Trump called in and said, I want him.
I remember him.
Right, I remember him. He likes me. I like him. He says nice things about me. I want him to be the nominee. And instead of the leadership, and McConnell knows better here, instead of them saying, you know, Mr. President, we appreciate that, but we're not doing that. This is a chance for us to make an important statement and inroad because the Senate is on the line, right? The politics dictates, you know, all the analytics we see in football right now, and, you know, when you're fourth in inches, do you go for it or not going? In politics, it's the same kind of analytics. You know, you get to a certain point, you kind of look at the game plan and go, no, we got to put the right candidate in the right spot to do the right thing.
Let me say, Michael, you don't need a computer. I think in the case of drafting Herschel Walker as your candidate.
I take that point. I take that point. But when you're looking at it from the perch of a McConnell, who is, despite what you may think or feel about him, a very good strategist in positioning his candidates for the office. The outlier was this race for him,
but they were all part of it.
They were all a part of it. And here's the test going forward: will they be a part of it in the next cycle? Because there's more Trump crazy to come.
That is exactly right. This to me is the big thing coming out of tonight, right? There's all these different, I mean, there's the stakes of the representation of the people of Georgia. There's the Democratic Party having 51-49. There's the political lessons and the political infrastructure. There's a question, though, about Donald Trump and the Republican Party, specifically this Trump question, which is how many seats and how many losses are you going to let this guy hang on your neck? That's 3 Senate losses.
Look at 24 in the Senate seats.
3 Senate losses that he hung on your neck in 2 years. And they, you know, I don't know, Nicole said it right. There's no smoke-filled room for people to get together and be like, we're not having it. They're not breaking with him. But I don't know, man. The last thing you want in the world is him as the center of your national party.
No, and maybe celebrity candidates are not the answer here.
Right.
And that may be a lesson and a takeaway for them, too.
Maybe substantive candidates matter. And shout out to the organizers who were on the ground, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, Asian American Advocacy Fund. Folks were on the ground. The New Georgia Project, we haven't talked enough about the work and the coalitions that were built. And I would like to just give a shout out to Killer Mike, because he got a lot of smoke. We're having a meeting with Brian Kemp, and it's my understanding understanding that he really did the work with the Warnock campaign and the churches. So shout out to that coalition in Georgia, because that is why I think Democrats and voters across the state in Georgia can just breathe a sigh of relief tonight.
But I think one last thing on that, I think it's important to also note that Democrats did a good job improving on the games, that part of the game plan they needed to. But Republicans also played a role in that. And I think that's something that's going to tweak the party a little bit, because you lost Republicans tonight in this race. And that's going to be interesting going forward.
Jen Psaki, Simone Sanders Townsend, Michael Steele. Thanks so much, guys. Rachel, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Much appreciated. We're coming up on the top of the hour, where Georgia voters have just made a historic choice in the United States Senate race tonight between incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and his Republican challenger, Herschel Walker. NBC News projects that Raphael Warnock has won re-election, has won election to his first full term as a United States Senator. This makes him the first African-American man elected to a full term in the United States Senate from the great state of Georgia. We've been watching these results come in over the course of the night. This was very, very close, as we saw it. You see the distance between the two candidates right now as we watch those come in. We're just looking live at Warnock headquarters. We are expecting for the next few minutes Senator Warnock to make remarks, although we do not yet see him on the stage. I will tell you that we have just had a statement released from the Democratic leader of the United States Senate, Chuck Schumer. He released this statement. It says, Raphael Warnock's victory shows once again that Democrats are in sync with America and MAGA Republicans are not. Reverend Warnock's well-earned win is not just a victory for Georgia, but also for democracy. As the last brick in our firewall against extremist MAGA Republican policies that threaten the very essence of our democracy, tonight we celebrate for my friend Raphael, for his beloved state of Georgia, for a Democratic Senate, and most of all for our country. Tomorrow we will roll up our sleeves and get back to work. As you can see in this live shot, there are people on stage now getting ready for what we expect will be a victory speech by Raphael Warnock. Again, tonight, NBC News has projected that the winner of this Senate race in the United States Senate seat in Georgia is Raphael Warnock, the Democratic incumbent, defeating his Republican challenger, Herschel Walker. Steve Kornacki, we know what the result is now. We've been watching with you over the course of the night as these results have come in. What can you tell us about how this ultimately came down? What was the bottom line story here about how Warnock won?